The young man stands before his instructor, his head bowed as she lists his failures. His grades in practical skills and potion making are abysmal, a stark contrast to the prestigious setting of the academy. He suddenly erupts with a shameless declaration, shouting that his only goal is to become popular with girls. While his classmates look on with varying degrees of pity and annoyance, he internally laments his inability to actually perform the magic that would make his school life exciting. Within the grand, stone walls of the Siryu Academy of Magic, an institution dedicated to forging the next generation of elite magic wielders, the atmosphere is far from prestigious for some. Takazama-sensei looms over her students, her voice echoing as she calls them useless hatchlings. She focuses her ire specifically on the boy, reminding him that he is the lowest of the low. While some of his peers doze off or ignore the lecture, he is forced to confront the reality of his standing at the very bottom of the class. He grits his teeth, the weight of her words sinking in as she points out his complete lack of magical ability. Despite his outward bravado, the truth of being unable to wield even a single spell hangs heavily over him. With a sharp command, the instructor signals the start of the practical session. She urges the group to find a magical discipline that resonates with them, hoping to spark some semblance of talent in the struggling students. As the students prepare, the gray-haired Tinsen sneers at him, mocking his lack of focus. Undeterred, the boy centers himself, determined to prove that he belongs among the ranks of the mages. He begins to channel his energy, boasting to his skeptical teacher that his performance will finally earn him the admiration he craves. A faint aura seems to stir around him, drawing the attention of those nearby. Despite his intense effort and the visible strain on his face, no magic manifests. He stands alone before the academy, a figure of pure exertion who, despite trying harder than anyone else, remains unable to produce even a flicker of mystical power. He stands amidst the chatter as the school bell chimes, signaling the end of another grueling day. Takazama-sensei dismisses the class with a sharp reminder of their duties, while the other students whisper behind his back, questioning how someone with zero magical aptitude was even admitted to the academy. As he makes his way outside, the mockery follows him like a shadow. A group of boys jeers loudly, speculating that his family must have bribed the school, as they can't fathom why a talentless hatchling would be allowed to walk the same halls as them. Nearby, a group of girls joins the chorus of disdain, their voices dripping with contempt. They label him the absolute worst, laughing at rumors that he only wants to become a powerful mage to build a personal harem, a thought they find utterly repulsive. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind sweeps through the courtyard, catching everyone off guard. He can only watch in stunned silence as the gale whips around the students, its sudden intensity far beyond any natural breeze. The girls' screams pierce the air as the unnatural wind lifts their skirts high. It is a moment of pure, chaotic embarrassment that leaves the entire group exposed and frantic. Seeing the display, the boys from earlier erupt in cheers, mistakenly believing he has finally manifested magic. Specifically, wind magic used for a lewd purpose. He frantically tries to protest his innocence, but his denials are drowned out by their rowdy approval and the confusion of the moment. The situation worsens when Yui Mayonnaise confronts him, her expression a mix of shock and deep disappointment. She scolds him, lamenting that the very first thing he would do upon discovering his magical talent is something so shameful, leaving him desperate to clear his name. The tension is interrupted by the arrival of Tinsen-senpai, whose presence causes a hush to fall over the crowd. The other students are baffled, wondering why a high-ranking elite would bother acknowledging someone as lowly as Kaido. Later, as they walk away from the crowd, Yui's tone softens, though she warns him that being seen with a bottom tier, like him, will only bring her trouble. He walks beside her in somber silence, the weight of his social standing feeling heavier than ever. She attempts to lift his spirits by explaining the academy's rigid hierarchy, noting that while Tinsen is an elite eagle tier, there is more to a person than their rank. She encourages him not to let the labels get him down and suggests that a good meal might be the best way to clear his head. She presents the lunchboxes with a proud smile, explaining how she woke up early to prepare a variety of fried chicken. Kaido stares at the massive spread, his mouth agape as he protests that it is far too much food for one person. In response to his complaints, she lets out a sudden, undignified snort of laughter before turning the conversation back to his earlier claims. She questions if he was truly serious when he said his only motivation for learning magic was to become popular with girls. She continues, reminding him of his stated ambition to one day reach the prestigious Phoenix tier, a goal that has driven him to endure the Tinsen family's grueling training regimen. He remains silent, his gaze downcast as she suggests that if people knew how much effort he was actually putting in, they would surely stop mocking him. Looking back on those early days, he realizes how naive he had been, fully aware of his own lack of innate talent, but still desperate to grasp even a sliver of magical ability. He suddenly breaks into a wide, carefree grin, insisting that as a teenage boy, it is only natural to want to learn impressive magic just to catch the eyes of the girls. She isn't fooled for a second, flatly stating that no one would subject themselves to such brutal training for a reason so shallow. Unfazed, he simply thanks her for the delicious meal and prepares to head back to class. As he walks away, he admits to himself that the talk of popularity is merely a facade he has maintained for years. His true motivation stems from a promise made long ago to his childhood friend, Mai. The memory takes him back to their youth, to a sterile clinic where they both underwent checkups to determine if they possessed any magical potential. There, a young, vibrant girl with twin tails cheered with pure joy, her eyes sparkling as she celebrated the news that they would both become magic wielders together. She was once the center of a childhood vow, a memory where a young boy promised to become a phoenix tier wielder just to protect her. They had sealed it with a pinky promise, a bond that felt unbreakable then. But in the present, he reflects bitterly on how he still hasn't been able to manifest even a sliver of magic, leaving that promise unfulfilled. Now, she stands at the center of a very different world, swarmed by adoring crowds and flashing lights. Her peers whisper in awe about the Ice Queen, the youngest phoenix tier wielder in history, while guards struggle to keep the fans at bay. She is a star, untouchable and distant, moving through the school with a grace that commands attention. Watching her from the fringes, he can't help but feel the weight of that dumb promise and how much they have grown apart. She has become a celebrity in the entertainment industry, someone everyone is desperate to get close to, while he remains a face in the crowd, struggling with the reality of their divergent paths. The gap between them feels insurmountable. He sees himself as the lowest of the low, a stark contrast to the radiant figure she has become. The idea of someone like him protecting someone like her now seems like a cruel joke, a fantasy from a time before the world sorted them by their worth. His situation is made worse by the reputation he's gained. His words were twisted, making him a pariah among the girls at school. He admits to himself that the facade of wanting to be popular was just a desperate excuse to hide the sting of being laughed at for his lack of ability and his rock-bottom status. As he walks through the grand arches of the school courtyard, a heavy question hangs over him. What would she think if she saw the person he has become? With a heavy sigh, he convinces himself that she has likely forgotten all about their childhood pact. She walks past with her entourage, her expression distant and unreadable, seemingly worlds away from the boy she once knew, lost in the demands of her own high-profile life. They cross paths in the hallway, a moment of silent proximity where he keeps his head down, avoiding her gaze. She continues forward, her eyes fixed ahead, maintaining the cold composure that earned her her nickname. Her attendants urge her to hurry, pulling her away toward her next engagement. He stands still, just another face in the crowd, as the distance between their lives continues to widen with every step she takes. Yet, as she moves away, she pauses for a fleeting second, her gaze softening as she whispers his name under her breath, proving the memory isn't as dead as he fears. She watches as the famous girl departs, commenting on how amazing my Florence has become. Beside her, the boy hangs his head in shame, admitting to himself that he couldn't even bring himself to look at his former friend, feeling utterly pathetic in her presence. The girl turns to him with a supportive gaze, pointing out that my success wasn't just luck. Despite having no magical lineage, she worked incredibly hard to reach her current status. She encourages him, suggesting that if Mai could overcome such odds, then he surely has the potential to do the same. He clenches his fist tightly as the weight of her words sinks in, realizing that his old friend's assent wasn't merely a gift of nature. While she pushed herself to the limit, he feels as though he has been left far behind, despite them starting from the same point. This realization ignites a spark of defiance within him, and he declares that he doesn't care about the fame of others. With renewed resolve, he vows to become a top-tier magic wielder himself, deciding that now is not the time to wallow in self-pity or give up on his dreams. Nearby, a group of students gathers around a girl with vibrant twin tails and star-shaped hair accessories, showering her with praise. They insist that she is far more popular than the Ice Queen, citing her massive social media following, a claim she accepts with a smug, self-satisfied grin. The girl's companions continue their flattery, even stooping to compare physical attributes, and claiming she easily surpasses Mai in every department. Watching from a distance, the boy is taken aback by the sheer toxicity of their conversation, wondering why so many people are suddenly flocking to her side. She basks in the attention, recalling how her fans in the Church of Kiera adore her every post, even the slightly suggestive ones. To her, this ability to captivate an audience is just another form of innate talent, one she is more than happy to exploit for her own gain. He watches her with a mix of disbelief and secondhand embarrassment, finding her arrogant attitude completely off-putting. He privately doubts the legitimacy of her rank, suspecting that someone with such a shallow focus on popularity might be using underhanded tactics to maintain her status as a Phoenix-tier wielder. As the group of girls struts away, their voices echo through the hall with continued assertions that there is no way Mai could ever compete with their idol. The boy and his companion remain behind, watching the display of vanity with a sense of quiet exhaustion. They exchange a weary look, with the boy remarking on the sheer intensity of the toxic gossip they just witnessed. While the other girls continue to insist that their leader has the upper hand in any real competition of skill, he can only sigh at the absurdity of the situation. He stands firm in the checkered hallway, his gaze fixed on the group of girls who had been whispering. He demands to know who they think they are, talking behind someone's back when they don't even know her. The girls, led by a defiant student with twin tails, recoil slightly, but remain confrontational, asking if he has something to say. He doesn't back down, questioning why they are so invested in these rumors, and telling them that spreading such gossip doesn't make them look cool. The girls snap back, insisting that the rumors aren't just talk if they happen to be true, their posture defensive as they face him. Sensing the tension rising, some of the girls begin to lose their nerve, whispering about the risk of a higher-tier senior like Tengen Senpai getting involved. They start to hurry away, leaving one of their companions behind to plead for them not to abandon her in the middle of the confrontation. He seizes the moment of their hesitation, suggesting that if they truly have a grievance, they should challenge the girl they are slandering to a direct duel. This proposal clearly rattles them, as they stammer about the significant gap in their magical tiers, making such a challenge nearly impossible. Despite the obvious intimidation, the girl with the star-shaped clips puts on a smug front, boldly claiming she will be overtaking her rival's rank in no time. While she maintains her arrogant facade, her friends quickly pivot to mocking him, calling him a coward for hiding behind the reputation of his seniors. He stands silently, listening to the girls' gossip about Yui's rising popularity and her inevitable ascent to Raven tier. While they speculate on her potential, he remains acutely aware of the social pressure mounting around them. His silence is broken as the group's focus shifts to Mai, with Kiera dismissively claiming she merely skates by on natural talent. He can no longer remain quiet, knowing the immense, unseen effort the girl exerts that far surpasses anyone else's. Her dismissive attitude is cut short as he steps forward with a sharp, accusatory finger, loudly challenging her to a formal duel. His sudden challenge leaves the group speechless. He quickly lays out the extreme stakes. A victory would see them trade tiers, but a loss would result in his immediate expulsion from the academy. Yui looks on, her face pale with worry at the reckless gamble. He remains undeterred, declaring that he has no intention of forgiving anyone who tries to make a fool of Mai, no matter the personal cost. His bold words are met with a smirk as she accepts the challenge, mocking his hatchling status. He meets her gaze with cold determination, ready to settle the score. She and her friends head toward the designated combat zone, leaving a parting taunt about seeing him at the arena. Once they are alone, Yui questions the wisdom of his decision, terrified that he is throwing his future away. He counters by explaining that his disdain for those who badmouth others behind their backs is stronger than his self-preservation. He offers a quiet apology to his friend, admitting that while he knows the odds are against him and his dreams are at risk, he simply couldn't stand by and watch Mai be ridiculed. The scene shifts to the grand arena, where a crowd has already gathered. The air is thick with anticipation and mockery as the students gossip about the upcoming, seemingly impossible match between a Raven tier and a hatchling. Kaido stands in the center of the arena, the weight of the crowd's mockery pressing down on him. They jeer at his low rank, questioning his motives and suggesting he's only there to add to a supposed harem. Despite the insults and the pressure to forfeit, he remains steadfast, his gaze fixed forward. Across from him, his opponent wears a smug grin, her long twin tail swaying as she demands an apology for his earlier words. She mockingly offers him a place in her fan club if he surrenders now, but he refuses to back down, his resolve hardening against her arrogance. The announcer's voice booms across the vast stadium, formalizing the brutal terms of the engagement. If the challenger emerges victorious, he will seize his opponent's rank, but failure means immediate and permanent expulsion from the academy. High in the stands, the girl with the white twin tails watches with bated breath, her hands clenched as she whispers his name. Around her, the other students gossip and speculate, their voices a low hum of anticipation for the impending clash. With a sharp command from the official, the duel officially commences. Both combatants take their stances, the air crackling with the promise of magic as they prepare to fight with their futures on the line. She immediately takes to the skies, her levitation magic giving her a distinct advantage as she summons a twisting serpent of flame. He is forced into a desperate role to avoid the searing heat, while the spectators marvel at her ability to weave multiple magical attributes into a single, devastating display. He continues to scramble, barely staying ahead of her relentless assault as she maintains her aerial dominance. The crowd's commentary shifts to her physical prowess, comparing her favorably to the Academy's top elites while she revels in the spotlight. Caught up in the thrill of the performance, she strikes a dramatic pose, only to realize with a start that her movements have left her immodestly exposed. Her face flushes a deep crimson as she immediately points an accusing finger at him, her previous confidence replaced by indignant rage. The shift in the arena's atmosphere is instantaneous, as the spectators erupt in a chorus of condemnation, labeling him a deviant for the accidental sight. He tries to protest his innocence amidst the chaos, but his words are drowned out by the collective anger of the mob. Even his ally looks on with a cold, disappointed stare, her faith seemingly shaken by the turn of events. The crowd's heckling reaches a fever pitch, demanding he leave the arena in disgrace as the duel descends into a farce of public shaming. Though he remains the target of public scorn, his allies haven't completely abandoned him. Yui shouts encouragement from the stands, though she adds a stern warning that his earlier accidental indiscretion will still require a lecture once the match is over. While they cheer, the Academy's leadership observes the spectacle with clinical interest. The principal questions Takazuma-sensei about the boy's lack of a magical disposition, noting that despite their rigorous testing, they have found absolutely no mana emanating from him. Below them, the duel intensifies as Kiera launches a massive blast, forcing him to scramble away with a desperate curse. Having avoided the initial burst, he looks up to see his opponent hovering effortlessly in the air. She sighs, noting the crowd's growing impatience, and decides it is time to bring the spectacle to a swift, flashy conclusion. He tries to maintain his bravado, taunting her for failing to land a single hit despite her superior position. She merely scoffs at his arrogance, explaining that his survival thus far was a calculated move to entertain the audience, and that her restraint has finally reached its limit. With a sudden surge of power, she conjures a massive, swirling vortex of fire, naming the technique the Great Flame Serpent. He stands frozen, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the incinerating beast looming over the arena. As the flames roar, she offers a mockingly merciful choice. Surrender now and be spared a painful defeat. He grits his teeth in frustration, while in the stands, his friends watch with bated breath, fearing he won't be able to walk away from such an overwhelming attack unscathed. The surrounding students continue their relentless jeering, their voices blending into a cacophony of mockery that threatens to break his spirit. Suddenly, a sharp, authoritative voice cuts through the noise, demanding silence from the entire arena. She stands tall, radiating a rare, fierce dignity as she reprimands the crowd for their boorish behavior. She reminds them that as honorable magic wielders, they should show more respect for the duel and the participants instead of acting like a common rabble. Her sudden outburst leaves the stadium in a stunned hush, the spectators cowed by her unexpected intensity. She catches her breath, her cheeks flushing slightly as the heat of the moment begins to fade into self-consciousness. She is suddenly interrupted by a frantic voice calling from the sidelines, reminding her that she is already late for a scheduled photo shoot. Mai is ushered away by her staff, leaving the tense atmosphere of the duel behind as her professional obligations take precedence. She stands firm, her expression a mask of cold determination as she prepares to depart, while Kaido struggles to catch his breath beside her, his eyes wide with the weight of the moment. As she walks away, she privately admits that her actions might have been a bit excessive, though she bristles at the thought of Kiera stealing the spotlight. Meanwhile, Kaido watches her retreating figure, stunned by the realization of how much she has actually done to support him. While he stands braced for the coming storm, Kiera's patience finally snaps, and she declares that she is done playing games, vowing to demonstrate the true power of an honorable magic wielder as she begins to channel an immense surge of energy. She offers a final, cold apology to Kaido, signaling the end of their duel, while from the sidelines, Yui watches in mounting horror, her voice caught in her throat as she fears for his safety. The air erupts in a violent inferno as she unleashes the Great Flame Serpent, a massive, multi-headed beast of pure fire that lunges toward its target with predatory hunger. He is instantly engulfed by the searing heat, his mind racing with the bitter sting of defeat and the looming threat of expulsion, finally understanding the gravity of the warnings he had previously dismissed. As the flames roar, a pair of eyes snap open with an intensity that defies the surrounding chaos, leaving the spectators breathless and Yui trembling as they wait for the smoke to clear. He emerges from the dissipating haze completely unscathed, standing tall amidst the charred ground without a single mark on his uniform, much to his own confusion. The arena erupts in a cacophony of disbelief as the students question the nature of the magic they just witnessed, while Yui's fear turns to pure elation, cheering at the top of her lungs for what she believes is the awakening of his latent power. As she celebrates, the surrounding onlookers struggle to identify the strange energy emanating from him, sensing a defensive capability that defies their understanding of traditional magic. Kaido stands in the arena, his mind racing as he tries to process the sudden shift in the battle. He realizes that Kiera diverted her lethal attack at the very last moment, a flash of light having changed everything. He questions if he somehow manifested magic unconsciously, while Kiera herself seems paralyzed, unable to comprehend why she couldn't follow through with her strike. He is suddenly overwhelmed as the atmosphere shifts into something far more surreal. Kiera clings to him, her clothes disheveled and her demeanor transformed into one of desperate affection. She begs for his attention, her voice trembling as she pleads for him to keep his eyes on her and no one else, while other students in the background seem equally swept up in a sudden, inexplicable fervor. Kiera leans in closer, her eyes shimmering with heart-shaped pupils as she gazes up at him with an intense, almost hypnotic longing. With a flushed face and a wide, eager smile, she implores him to look deep in her eyes and tell her she is a good girl, her voice dripping with a need for validation that borders on the obsessive. She continues her display, leaving Yui and Mai in a state of utter disbelief as they witness the once aggressive girl acting like a love-struck maiden. Kaido himself is frozen, his hands raised in a defensive gesture as he tries to make sense of the chaotic scene unfolding before him. They are not the only ones affected, as Mai is also gripped by the strange influence, her composure crumbling as she is swept away by the same mysterious energy. She finds herself overwhelmed by a sensation she describes as far too stimulating, her face flushed as the magical aura takes hold of her senses. She reaches out and grabs Kaido, pulling him toward her with surprising strength. She rambles about her past, claiming that her first love was even younger than he is, her words a jumbled mess of confession and desire that only adds to the growing madness in the arena. The entire area has descended into absolute bedlam, with students collapsing and crying out in a frenzy of misplaced passion. Amidst the turmoil, the principal arrives on the scene, her presence immediately drawing the attention of those few who still have their wits about them. The principal is identified as the source of the chaos, her legendary charm ability having been triggered. A warning ripples through the crowd for everyone to avert their gaze, explaining that even a second of eye contact is enough for her to completely steal a person's heart, leaving them helpless under her spell. She exerts an aura so powerful that Kaido quickly realizes the danger, understanding now that the strange behavior of the girls was a direct result of this overwhelming magical force. The realization that such a powerful and uncontrollable force is at play sends a chill through him, as he struggles to maintain his own focus. He can only watch as she remains blissfully unbothered despite the havoc she has caused, striking a cute pose and reminding everyone that while she may be in her 120s, age is just a number. Her youthful appearance and playful attitude stand in stark contrast to the horror and exhaustion on the faces of the students, who can only watch in disbelief as the situation spirals further out of control. She has left him in a state of absolute panic. Kaido clutches his head, his eyes wide with terror as the realization of his predicament sinks in. The crowd erupts in outrage, branding him a scoundrel for wielding a power that manipulates the heart. He desperately tries to explain that his previous comments about wanting to be popular were merely a joke, but his pleas fall on deaf ears as the students label him the most despicable person to possess such an ability. He finds himself surrounded by a sea of condemnation, with shouts of pervert and the worst echoing through the arena. Despite the vitriol from the stands, the girls nearby remain hopelessly infatuated, clinging to him with dazed expressions and hearts in their eyes. He can only cry out in frustration, insisting that everyone has the wrong idea, but the label of a deviant seems to have already stuck. His mind races as he contemplates the chaotic future ahead, certain that this unwanted charm will only bring more misery. Nearby, the confusion lingers. Mai is ushered away by her companions while Yui remains in a trance-like state, still processing the fact that he possesses such a scandalous power. The weight of his new reputation begins to settle, casting a long shadow over his aspirations as a magic wielder. He watches as the day draws to a close, his screams of despair echoing into the open sky. With the title of the world's most perverted magic wielder now firmly attached to his name, a new and undoubtedly difficult chapter of his life begins. The peaceful school life he once knew has vanished, replaced by the infamy of a power he never truly wanted. Outside the school, a group of students is abuzz with gossip. One boy admits to strange feelings despite Kaido being a guy, while a girl expresses her exhaustion with her current relationship, wishing she could be with him instead. Nearby, the school building stands as a silent witness to the growing disorder. Mai observes the mess, noting that even the high-level magic wielders are struggling to maintain control over the escalating chaos. He stands alone, the weight of a grave revelation settling upon him. His very existence and the nature of his magic have become a matter of intense scrutiny for the entire community of magic wielders. Inside a formal office, a peculiar figure sits behind a large desk. This small, one-eyed being muses that the boy's power might be a rare form of ocular control, a phenomenon previously only found in ancient texts. The young man watches in confusion as the strange creature tilts its head at an impossible angle. He can't help but ask why the principal is behaving so oddly during such a serious discussion. In response, the principal details the terrifying scope of his gift. It isn't just about attraction. He has the power to capture the heart of anyone and force them to reveal their deepest secrets simply by making eye contact. He recoils in shock as the accusations mount. The principal mentions rumors of him potentially expelling the entire student body and reveals that Kaido's power even forced the principal to accidentally disclose their own secret age. Because the situation is so unprecedented, the principal reveals that the matter will be brought before the Council of the Seven Sages. The mention of this elite group leaves the young student reeling with uncertainty. He stands before the small, one-eyed authority, listening as the verdict is delivered. The principal reveals that the Seven Sages, the most powerful magic wielders including Mai herself, have already deliberated on his case and reached a final decision. This decision is a crushing blow. They intend to confiscate his charm ability. As the words hang in the air, Mocha looks on with a wide-eyed, almost blank expression, while he can only utter a confused sound of disbelief. The principal continues the explanation from across the desk, stating that using magic to manipulate the minds and emotions of others is a grave taboo in their world. Such an offense typically carries the penalty of ability confiscation, or in more severe instances, even harsher punishments. Stunned by the finality of the situation, he asks if this means he will truly never be able to use magic again. The principal remains unmoved, confirming that the confiscation is a settled matter and that they only chose this path because the incident occurred so soon after his ability was first identified. Suddenly, thick, dark strands of hair lash out like living shadows, binding him tightly before he can even react. He lets out a cry of shock as the principal declares that there is no room for negotiation or escape. While he remains immobilized and pleading for a moment to explain, Mocha stands nearby, coldly telling him to simply give up. He ignores her, desperately calling out to the principal to wait. The weight of the situation begins to sink in, casting a dark shadow over his eyes as he realizes the gravity of his loss. If his magic is stripped away now, his life as a mage will be over before it truly began. He bows his head, the dark fringe of his hair masking his expression as he thinks of the promise he made to Mai. To lose his power now would mean failing her and losing everything he has fought to achieve. Despite the magical restraints tightening around him, he finds the strength to shout his defiance, refusing to surrender his ability even if it is deemed dangerous. Mocha watches him, her expression unreadable as he continues to beg the principal for a fair hearing. Finally, his frustration boils over into a raw, desperate scream. He demands to know if they have any idea how hard he has struggled for this single chance, his face contorted with a mix of rage and agony that leaves both Mocha and the principal momentarily stunned. He watches in disbelief as the small, spherical principal transforms into a young girl with long, flowing hair and a delicate headband. She clutches her face, her eyes wide with a strange, ecstatic light, exclaiming that a century has passed since she last experienced such a sensation. Confused by this sudden shift, he questions if this is the result of the charm ability he was accused of using. The girl, formerly the authoritative principal, begins to act with exaggerated clumsiness, playfully striking him while lamenting how she could ever doubt such a wonderful student. She leans in closer, her expression softening into a plea as she asks him to be her boyfriend. The weight of her words hangs in the air as she repeats that it has been over 100 years since she felt the touch of a man, her loneliness finally boiling over. Horrified by the revelation of her true age, he recoils, shouting that he has no interest in a woman who is 127 years old. As he turns to flee, she collapses into a heap of tears, wailing about her long history of being single and the cruelty of his rejection. Once he manages to distance himself, he stands alone in the quiet hallway, his hands gripping his hair in frustration. The threat of losing his magic still looms, and the situation seems to be spiraling into an even more chaotic and incomprehensible mess. His solitude is short-lived as Alway Kiera suddenly appears, her twin tails bouncing with energy. She points a finger at him, declaring that their previous encounter didn't count and demanding a rematch to prove she can outdo him this time. Before he can even respond, the air seems to shimmer with the residual charm magic, and she suddenly appears before him completely exposed. She lets out a bashful, high-pitched scream, calling him an idiot as he recoils in absolute terror and confusion. Desperate to escape the madness, he bolts down the corridor, accidentally colliding with several other students. He realizes with a jolt of panic that the charm effect is still active and spreading, forcing him to squeeze his eyes shut to avoid seeing things he should. He finds himself completely cornered by a growing crowd of enamored girls who see him not as a student in trouble, but as an irresistible heartthrob. They swarm him, clamoring for his attention and his phone number, leaving him utterly overwhelmed by the very magic he was supposed to have confiscated. He sprints down the hallway, his face a mask of pure terror as a literal tide of infatuated students surges behind him. Their collective roar of "Wait up!" echoes through the corridor, a deafening wall of sound that threatens to swallow him whole. Despite his desperate flight, the mob eventually overtakes him, numerous hands reaching out to snag his blazer and pull him back into the fray. As he is hauled into the center of the swarm, he can only marvel at the sheer, terrifying potency of the magic he unleashed, realizing too late that he has become the most hunted man on campus. As he is surrounded, the situation spirals into utter madness as the girls begin to fight amongst themselves for his attention. Their voice is a cacophony of desperate pleas and startling confessions. One girl screams that she'll dump her boyfriend on the spot if he'll just pick her, while another, her face flushed with a first-time crush, begs him to be her very first love. To his mounting horror, the attraction isn't limited to the female students. A group of hulking, muscular young men join the scrum, pinning him between their massive frames. They boast about their physiques, inviting him to experience a muscle sandwich as they flex their bicep-heavy arms around his much smaller form. Amidst the chaos, Aoi and her companions find themselves caught in the competitive fervor, their eyes wide with a manic intensity. Seeing the competition, Aoi realizes that she needs to significantly escalate her efforts if she wants to stand out in this sea of obsessed admirers. The hallway transforms into a surreal display of desperation, with students stripping down or striking poses to catch his eye. Trapped and suffocating under the weight of their unwanted affection, he begins to chant a desperate incantation, calling upon the flowing streams and scattered petals to grant him a reprieve. With a final, shouted command, he invokes the alluring blossom of dreams, Matricaria, unleashing a violent burst of magical energy. The resulting shockwave, accompanied by a whirlwind of petals, sends the entire mob flying backward, clearing the hallway in a single, explosive instant. He collapses to the floor, gasping for air as the dust settles, only to be startled by a cold, familiar voice announcing his detention. Looking up from his hands and knees, he sees a figure standing over him, their presence cutting through the lingering magical haze. She is revealed to be Mai, her expression stern as she reaches out a hand toward him, commanding him to keep his head down. She warns him that looking at anyone else will only trigger the charm effect again, her calm authority providing a much-needed anchor in the wake of the disaster. She activates a transport spell, a swirling, warp hole opening beneath him. The magical vortex pulls him in, whisking him away from the scene of his accidental conquest and into the unknown. He tumbles through the dark void, landing hard on the cold floor with a pained cry. As he struggles to make sense of his surroundings, a stern voice cuts through his confusion, announcing that his arrival was anticipated. Looking up from the ground, he finds himself in a grand, high-ceilinged chamber, surrounded by a group of imposing figures. Mai stands among them, revealing that he is now in the presence of the Council of the Seven Sages, the governing body that has summoned him. One of the sages, a girl with wide, curious eyes, peers down at him while the council discusses the inherent risks of his presence. They speak of the need to conclude the matter quickly, warning each other to remain vigilant because his charm ability might still be active even if his eyes are shielded. The atmosphere in the room grows tense as the different members of the council react to the situation. Zeka grumbles with visible impatience, demanding they get on with the proceedings, while Mai and another silent sage maintain a stoic, watchful gaze on the captive student. Still reeling from the sudden transition, he stares up at the girl crouching before him, his mind racing with questions about her identity. She observes him with a playful but sharp intensity, noting that it is her first time seeing someone with the charm ability in person. She introduces herself as Mocha, a member of the Seven Sages whose own ability is Captivate, a power she admits is quite similar to his own. However, her tone shifts to one of mild accusation as she suggests that using such a power to affect the entire school was perhaps a bit excessive. In a desperate attempt to clear his name, he drops to his knees and bows his head low, pleading that the chaos was entirely unintentional. He insists that he wasn't trying to activate the ability on purpose, even as the girl reminds him of the great deal of trouble his duel caused. He continues his frantic explanation, swearing that he never harbored any plan to manipulate the feelings of his peers. He maintains that the ability manifested without his control, a sudden and unwanted surge of power that he was powerless to stop. Despite his pleas, the council members remain unmoved, discussing the gravity of his actions with cold detachment. Mai points out that regardless of his intent, the fact remains that he caused a massive disturbance within the academy using magic in a way that is strictly forbidden. A senior member of the council steps forward, his expression grim as he delivers a lecture on the true purpose of magic, which should be used to aid the world rather than disrupt it. He concludes with a chilling declaration: the charm ability is simply too dangerous to be allowed, leaving the young man frozen in shock. He felt the walls closing in, his mind racing with a desperate plea for anyone to save him. The council's cold indifference to his words left him reeling, realizing they hadn't truly listened to a single thing he'd said in his own defense. Amidst his panic, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension with a question that caught him completely off guard. She looked him in the eye and asked what he truly desired to become, forcing him to look past his current fear. As he struggled to find an answer, the voices of the sages echoed through the vast chamber, shifting the focus from the recent incident to the terrifying potential of his future. They were less concerned with the past than with the disturbance such a skill could cause in the years to come. She didn't let him look away, pressing him further by suggesting that their paths were intertwined. She challenged him to consider what he intended to do with his power, leaving her own sentence unfinished as she waited for his resolve to surface. With a look of unwavering determination, she declared her own ambition to follow in the footsteps of the legendary Highland. The image of the great sage loomed in her mind, a symbol of the pinnacle of magical mastery she sought to reach. This shared dream had its roots in their childhood, back when they first learned of the man known as the strongest magic wielder in history. Even then, the name of the great sage Highland carried a weight that sparked something within them both. They had spent hours pored over old books, marveling at the tales of how he had ended world famines and halted devastating wars single-handedly. While others might have seen it as mere myth, they believed in the reality of his greatness. Caught up in the excitement of the legend, he had thrown his fist into the air, vowing to become just as strong and bring peace to the world. His youthful enthusiasm was infectious, a pure expression of a dream born from wonder. She had smiled at his outburst, agreeing that reaching for the stars was the only way to go. However, she also knew the path to becoming a sage was a lonely and difficult one, a burden too heavy for one person to carry alone. Because of that shared understanding, they had clasped hands and made a solemn promise to join the 7 sages together. It was a pact to never let the other face the journey alone, aiming to both become as great as the legend they admired. He is stunned, his eyes wide as he realizes she hasn't forgotten the bond they shared as children. Suddenly, a heavy hand slams into the back of his head, forcing him toward the floor as a gruff voice demands he show proper respect and keep his head down. While pinning the boy down, the warrior declares his own ambition to join the ranks of the 7 sages, following the path already taken by the young woman. Despite the humiliating position, the youth's resolve only hardens. He declares with absolute certainty that he will take this power of his and put it to good use, vowing to become the strongest wielder to ever walk the earth, a statement that draws looks of disbelief and mockery from the assembled elite. The council members dismiss his bold claim as nothing more than a childish joke, arguing that his lack of a mentor and inability to control his power, which some whisper is a form of lust magic, make him a liability rather than an asset. Just as the tension reaches a breaking point, a woman with a playful glint in her eye leans in close to the warrior, her voice a soft, magical whisper known as the Maiden's Whisper that catches him completely off guard. He struggles against the sudden, overwhelming charm, shouting for her to cease her interference while the others watch the bizarre display in silence. The distraction works perfectly, and the warrior finds himself unable to refuse her request, much to the confusion of the young students watching the exchange. Seizing the moment, she steps forward and pulls the boy into a firm embrace, boldly proclaiming herself as the only one capable of taming his unique and dangerous abilities. Standing tall with the boy still held close, she issues a challenge to the council. Give her 1 year to train him, and if he hasn't mastered his power by then, they can do whatever they deem necessary. She continues her persuasive argument, pointing out that while a major incident at the academy would be disastrous, the risk vanishes if the boy masters his volatile abilities. Her gaze remains fixed on the officials as she promises to take full responsibility for his oversight until that day comes, ensuring that no further harm will come to the outside world. Because of her persistence, the atmosphere in the room shifts as the glasses-wearing official recalls his own admission that a mentor was the missing piece of the puzzle. She leans in, suggesting that despite the differences in their specific magical disciplines, her own unique experiences allow her to empathize with the young man's struggles in a way others cannot. Suddenly, she wraps her arms around him in a bold, possessive embrace that leaves him frozen in shock. With a defiant smile, she makes her allegiance clear to everyone present, loudly proclaiming that she is firmly on his side and will not be moved. Moments later, she turns her charms back toward the official, pleading for a mere 12 months to prove her worth as a teacher. The others watch the exchange in stunned silence, their eyes wide as they realize the gravity of the deal being struck between the mysterious woman and the academy leadership. In response to her proposal, the official finally relents, addressing the young student directly to confirm his willingness to accept this path. He acknowledges that she is likely the only one capable of guiding him through his current crisis, and the boy responds with a sharp, unwavering affirmation of his commitment. With the decision made, the official formally grants a 1-year reprieve from any further disciplinary action, urging the student to train diligently alongside his companion. The young man accepts the challenge with a thunderous shout of agreement, his mind already racing with the ambition to eventually stand among the legendary 7 sages alongside his partner. As the meeting concludes, she playfully clings to him once more, her voice dripping with affection as she looks forward to their time together. While he struggles with the sudden intimacy and the weight of his new path, his companion watches from the side, her expression a mix of bewilderment and growing irritation at the woman's forwardness. Kaido stands beside Zenji, who exudes an air of effortless confidence as she prepares to guide him through the fundamentals of being a magic wielder. With a sudden flourish, she activates a warp hole, instantly transporting them both back to the academy grounds. Kaido is left reeling from the sudden shift in location, while she simply winks, dismissing the feat as a common trick among the sages. He can hardly believe his luck, questioning why someone of her immense caliber, one of the legendary 7 sages, would go out of her way to become his mentor. She merely laughs, brushing off his intense curiosity by claiming she simply went with the flow of the moment. However, her expression quickly shifts to one of annoyance as she recalls how the other sages criticized her for her impulsive decision, leaving Kaido to wonder about the internal politics of such powerful figures. Despite the friction with her peers, she explains that she feels a kinship with him due to the nature of their respective skills, and suggests they head toward the clock tower to continue their discussion. As they walk, she opens up about her past, revealing that her captivate ability brought her nothing but trouble and scorn from other girls when she was younger, often being unfairly labeled a homewrecker. She admits that seeing him struggle reminded her of her own past, and she feels a responsibility to use her powers for good, just as her own mentors once helped her find her way. Looking out over the sprawling city from the academy, she reflects on the privilege they hold, noting that as magic wielders, they are among the lucky few in a world where most are born without such gifts. She stands beside him on the rooftop, overlooking the sprawling city, and asks for his perspective on the vista before them. He seems puzzled by the question, repeating the words back to her, as if searching for a deeper meaning. As they look out, the reality of their world becomes clear. Magic has woven itself into the fabric of daily life, making everything more convenient and improving the quality of existence for many. From simple tasks like opening a jar to more complex feats, the presence of magic is a constant, helpful companion. However, she shifts the tone, her gaze lingering on the horizon as she acknowledges the darker side of this gift. For every act of kindness, there are those who choose a different path, using their innate abilities to commit acts of evil, bullying the weak, and evading justice with ease. She turns to him, her expression grave as she explains that as an honorable magic wielder, it is one's moral duty to use their power solely for the benefit of society. The weight of her words hangs in the air as she issues a stern warning. If he ever considers using his powers for the wrong reasons, she will not hesitate to take responsibility and stop him, regardless of the cost. He listens intently as she delivers a fundamental truth of their existence. Whether he sought this power or not, it is now his to bear, and with such great power comes an equally great responsibility. Her eyes lock onto his, searching for a spark of resolve as she asks him directly if he truly possesses the fortitude required to be a magic wielder in this world. She continues, explaining that the title of the 7 sages is an honor bestowed only upon those who wield their abilities with a profound sense of purpose, a standard she has already sworn to uphold before the council. Inspired by her conviction, he places a hand over his heart and makes a solemn vow to commit himself fully to the path of the 7 sages, promising to wield his own abilities with righteousness and honor. He stands before her, uncertain of what comes next, while she scrutinizes him with a calculating gaze, wondering aloud if his current state is sufficient to meet her standards. He is surprised when she admits that while she initially suspected him of bluffing, her self-proclaimed expertise in judging men has convinced her of his potential, and Zenji is now eager to see what he can truly do. She then shifts her focus to the bustling school grounds below, singling out 3 specific individuals, Aoi, Himari, and Mai, identifying them as the key players in her upcoming plan. She demands that he use his charm ability on those 3 specifically, causing Kaido to recoil in utter shock, his voice cracking as he tries to process the absurdity of the request. He immediately protests, fearing that losing control of such a power would lead to the same chaotic disaster that previously engulfed the school, but she merely laughs it off, suggesting the outcome would be entertaining regardless. He feels the pressure mount as Zenji leans in closer to reveal that this is part of a much larger, more important mission, leaving him visibly shaken and sweating under the weight of her expectations. She finally reveals her true motivation, confessing with a gleeful and almost predatory expression that she simply has an insatiable fondness for adorable girls and wants him to act as her scout. She remains undeterred by his skepticism and moral quandaries, even as Kaido worries that such actions will only make the entire student body despise him. He is suddenly gripped by a vivid memory of being swarmed by a sea of adoring women, a chaotic feast that leaves him terrified of the consequences should he ever unleash that power again. He is physically shoved toward his first target despite his desperate pleas for help, as she demands he begin the mission immediately while he cries out in a futile attempt to escape his fate. Zenji gives him a final, forceful push, her smile never wavering. She warns that if he refuses to cooperate, she will have no choice but to reconsider her role as his mentor. He is sent hurtling through the air, his screams of terror echoing across the school grounds. The flight ends abruptly as he crashes headlong into a passing student. The impact is jarring, and he finds himself in a deeply compromising and embarrassing position, his face pressed firmly against her. She cries out in a mixture of shock and sudden pain. She quickly recognizes him as the individual rumored to possess the charm ability. He scrambles backward, stammering a frantic apology and explaining that his mentor forced him into this situation, even though he still lacks any control over the power. Nearby, the woman who launched him watches the unfolding disaster with a mischievous glint in her eye. The student is visibly repulsed, calling him gross and demanding that he stay far away from her. He tries to plead with her to wait and listen, but she is already turning her back on him in utter disgust, unwilling to hear another word. He realizes he is at a complete dead end, his mission failing before it even truly began. Thinking of his only other path forward, he decides he must make a desperate, all-or-nothing move, regardless of how it might be perceived. With a frantic expression and wide eyes, he begs her to let him do it just once for his own sake. His words are disastrously chosen, leaving her completely baffled and horrified by the implication of his request. She reacts with pure, unadulterated outrage, questioning what kind of woman he takes her for. While his mentor laughs hysterically at the catastrophic choice of words, the student's opinion of him plummets, and she brands him as an even viler person than the rumors suggested. Her patience finally snaps, and she delivers a powerful, sweeping kick that sends him tumbling across the pavement. She leaves him groaning in agony on the ground, hurling one final, stinging insult at the pervert as she departs. He skids to a halt near two other girls, who immediately identify him as the notorious charm guy. He can barely move, his body aching from the physical assault and the weight of his social failure. Driven by sheer desperation and perhaps the lingering shock of the blow, he looks up at the pair and shouts another disastrous request. He begs them both to let him do them together, doubling down on the misunderstanding. He continues his desperate pursuit, pleading with the girls to stop for just a moment, but his cries only fuel their panic as they flee from the man they now brand a notorious predator. As he is forced to a halt by their defensive stance, his frustration boils over, questioning the very purpose of his existence while his mentor watches from the sidelines. She observes his struggle with a mix of pity and amusement, thinking to herself that he is truly doomed if he cannot figure out how to interact with girls before even attempting to master his abilities. The twin-tailed girl confronts him with bared teeth, declaring that her patience has reached its limit and that it is time to settle their score once and for all. He, however, is in no mood for a duel and frantically explains that he simply doesn't have the time to deal with her right now, which only seems to incense her further. Before he can move past her, a suggestion from his mentor to use his unique charm on the girl catches him off guard. She points out how cute the girl is, urging him to just use his power, leaving him reeling at the sheer absurdity of the woman's whims and the impossible situation he's been thrust into. Without another word, she unleashes her fury, conjuring a violent, spiraling vortex of wind that catches him completely by surprise. The sheer intensity of the magic manifests as a localized storm, centered directly on his position. The sudden gale lifts him off his feet, his cry of alarm swallowed by the roaring wind as he is tossed about like a leaf in a storm. The world becomes a blur of gray and white as the vortex gains strength. From the edge of the chaos, his mentor watches the swirling magic with a critical eye, noting the sheer annoyance of such a powerful and unpredictable technique. She warns him to be careful, even as she acknowledges that the girl's magic is a significant obstacle that he wasn't prepared to face. The cyclone reaches a crescendo of embarrassment, the sheer force of the wind whipping through the area and leaving the girls shrieking in distress as their composure is literally blown away. The violent gusts spare no one, turning the confrontation into a scene of total, windswept disorder. Once the air finally settles, he finds himself sprawled on the ground, facing the renewed and intensified wrath of the two girls. They tower over him, their faces flushed with anger as they scream at him for being an absolute idiot, their trust in him now completely non-existent after the chaotic display. He is met with nothing but scorn as Aoi and Himari stand their ground, their faces twisted in righteous indignation. They declare him an enemy of all women, refusing to tolerate his presence any longer after the perceived insult. Because of this harsh judgment, he desperately tries to plead his case, hands outstretched in a gesture of innocence. He insists that whatever happened was an accident and not on purpose, but his words fall on deaf ears as the girl's anger only seems to intensify. He feels a sudden surge of power and wonders if he has inadvertently activated some latent ability. Around him, the atmosphere shifts instantly. Girls who were just angry are now looking at him with predatory hunger, whispering about his newfound allure. In response to this magical aura, Himari's fury evaporates, replaced by a flushed, breathless excitement. She clenches her fists, her eyes wide with a sudden, intense desire, offering to show him anything he wants to see as the other girls watch in a similar daze. Realizing the situation has taken a turn for the worse, he decides his only option is to run. Zenji watches from the sidelines, her expression unreadable as she questions if he has finally accepted his fate or if he's just trying to delay the inevitable. Moments later, he is forced into a full-on sprint as a literal stampede of enamored girls chases him through the school grounds. Zenji watches the pursuit with a satisfied smirk, marveling at the sheer scale of the ability she has helped unleash. As the chaos unfolds, her thoughts turn to the future and the significant influence she now holds over his development. She acknowledges that while his power is impressive, it could easily spiral out of control if not properly guided by her hand. To ensure he reaches his full potential, she decides to escalate the situation even further. With a confident leap, she activates her own lust magic and hypnotic fragrance, determined to give her all in her role as his self-appointed mentor. She stands amidst the sea of slumbering students, casually observing the results of her magic. With a nonchalant air, she remarks that if his charm ability ever spirals out of control, putting everyone to sleep is a reliable solution to neutralize the threat. Turning her attention back to the young man, she asks if he believes his ability is currently active. He can only stare in awe, struck by the sheer efficiency with which she neutralized the entire mob in the blink of an eye, wondering at the depth of her power. He considers the sensation, noting a distinct warmth that gathers around his eyes whenever the power is in use. Hearing this, she grants him a passing grade for the day's progress, satisfied with his growing self-awareness and ability to track the flow of his own energy. She explains that the fundamental first step in mastering such a power is the ability to distinguish between when it is dormant and when it is active. With a confident wink, she encourages him to continue using the ability, insisting that constant practice and familiarity are the only ways to truly get a handle on the feeling. Despite her encouragement, he remains skeptical, reminding her of the absolute chaos her previous instructions caused. She remains firm, however, asserting that control is impossible without first immersing oneself in the feeling of the power, regardless of the initial mess it might create. She warns him that fear will only hinder his progress and that he must learn to take full command of his gift rather than letting it rule him. Setting their sights on the future, she establishes a new checkpoint for his training, catching him off guard with her sudden shift in focus. With a bold declaration, she vows that he will master the charm within a single month. Beyond that, she plans to spend the rest of the year using his refined abilities to perform a feat so significant it will capture the attention of the legendary Seven Sages. The sheer scale of her ambition leaves him speechless, his eyes widening at the perceived impossibility of the task. She acknowledges that such mastery usually takes far longer, but challenges him to find a better alternative given the high stakes of their current situation. Sensing his hesitation, she asks if the prospect of joining the sages is simply too daunting for him to handle. He stammers in response, caught between his own self-doubt and the intensity of her gaze as she questions his resolve to reach the top. Seeing him speak his mind so honestly reassures her, and she admits that she had briefly considered him a lost cause. Now fully committed, she promises to see his training through to the end, her resolve as sharp as ever as she prepares him for the trials ahead. She watches as the young man pumps his fist into the air, his voice ringing out with a newfound, albeit slightly naive, ambition to join the ranks of the Seven Sages. While his enthusiasm is undeniable, she can't help but remark that before he tackles such a lofty goal, he might first need a lesson in the basic art of conversing with women. Their moment of training is suddenly interrupted by a familiar voice calling out his name, catching them both off guard. He turns to find a beaming young woman approaching, her hands clasped in front of her as she expresses her relief at finally locating him. She is eager to share the news of his progress with her father, urging him to come along so they can report that he has at last identified his unique ability. As he recognizes her, the woman beside him reacts with wide-eyed curiosity, immediately captivated by the newcomer's charm and demanding an introduction to this unexpected arrival. Under the glow of a full moon, the news of a newly discovered ability is brought to a traditional household. The air is thick with anticipation as the word charm is whispered, a name for a power that is finally manifested after long years of search. Inside the dojo, the master of the house sits across from his pupils, his expression a mix of bewilderment and excitement. He admits that even he has never heard of such a skill, and if the principal is equally in the dark, then it truly is a rarity. He wonders aloud if this charm will complement the rigorous Tongan-style magical combat training they have practiced for so long, while the young man at the center of the discussion remains skeptical, questioning if all that grueling preparation was for nothing. He leans in closer, his voice booming with a mix of pride and overwhelming emotion. He commends the boy for leaving home at such a tender age to pursue his training, expressing a fatherly joy at the discovery of his magic. Despite the praise, the youth remains focused on the practical, pressing for a clear explanation of what this mysterious charm actually entails. Suddenly, the master stands, his energy erupting as he demands a demonstration. He is eager to see the fruits of his students' labor firsthand, ignoring the boy's frantic protests and visible alarm at the sudden challenge. A chaotic struggle ensues as the older man lunges forward, driven by a relentless curiosity to witness the power for himself. The student desperately tries to ward him off, shouting that the ability is uncontrollable and far too dangerous to be used as a mere exhibition, but his pleas fall on deaf ears as he is physically overwhelmed. From outside the estate, the sounds of the scuffle echo into the night air. Shouts of pain and frantic calls for the master to calm down pierce the silence, followed by a sudden, bizarre declaration of love that rings out across the grounds, suggesting the charm may have already taken effect in the most unexpected way. Later, the atmosphere settles into a more civilized tone around a steaming hot pot. The eldest daughter offers a sincere apology for her father's boisterous and unpredictable behavior, while the guest of honor, still recovering from the ordeal, assures her that no harm was done. As the meal continues, the master laughs heartily, acknowledging the sheer impact of a skill that could draw the immediate attention of the Seven Sages. The conversation turns to the whirlwind of events that followed the discovery, with the women noting how the council had whisked the young man away almost immediately, leaving him little time to process the monumental change in his life. Looking at him now, the two women share a quiet, reflective moment. They recall the days when he was a child who relied on them for everything. But as they watch him sit between them, they can't help but feel a growing sense of distance, realizing that his new path is taking him toward a future they can no longer fully share. She can't help but giggle, her hand covering her mouth as she flips through the old albums, teasingly reminding the young man of the days he'd run to her in tears. He, however, is mortified, desperately pleading for the embarrassing trip down memory lane to end as his past vulnerabilities are laid bare. He tries to regain his composure, insisting that he'll be perfectly fine now that he has finally manifested a phoenix tier ability. Despite his reassurances, the two women beside him are overcome with emotion, tearfully begging him to stay close and never leave their side, their dramatic outbursts making it clear how much they value his presence. This unwavering spirit was something his master had recognized long ago during their grueling training sessions. Even when other pupils faltered and gave in to exhaustion, the boy's sheer determination and grit stood out as his greatest assets, leading the older man to believe that he truly possessed the potential to one day join the ranks of the Seven Sages. Back in the present, the master watches with a proud smile as his daughter and her friend continue their dramatic display of affection. He reminds the young warrior that they will always be there to cheer him on, offering a place of refuge and support no matter where his new path leads him. As night falls over the estate, the sound of celebration echoes through the halls. Everyone raises their glasses in a joyous toast, feasting together to honor the momentous discovery of the boy's hidden power. Watching the festivities from the side, the master and his wife share a quiet moment of reflection. They remark on how naturally he has integrated into their lives, noting with a touch of amusement that they seemed even more thrilled about his success than he was himself. The master admits to himself that he often forgets the boy isn't his biological son, as the youth carries the very essence of their lineage in his heart. While the young man relaxes in a steaming bath, the weight of his earnest nature leaves a lasting impression on the couple who raised him as their own. Later that evening, she approaches her parents with a newfound gravity, kneeling formally on the tatami mats. Her expression is uncharacteristically serious as she asks if they have a moment to discuss a matter of great importance regarding their guest. Outside, the house is peaceful under the moonlight, but inside, the atmosphere shifts as she reveals the subject of her concern. Her parents look on with surprise as she begins to speak specifically about the young man's future and the path he is now forced to walk. He, meanwhile, is already fast asleep, drifting off into a deep slumber after the day's exhausting events. As he rests, his final thoughts linger on the manifestation of his charm, ability, and the unexpected support he received from the council meeting. He lies awake in the quiet of his room, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on him. While the celebration was grand, the path ahead feels daunting and uncertain, leaving him to wonder if he is truly ready for the challenges to come. Memories of his companions flicker through his mind, reminding him of the faith they've placed in his potential. He knows the entire Tenjin household is rooting for him, and that collective expectation fuels a burning resolve to reach the rank of the Seven Sages. The thought of my waiting for him to ascend to the Phoenix tier provides a final, sharp spark of motivation, cutting through his lingering doubts. Under the watchful gaze of the full moon, he finally settles into his futon, determined to rest, so he can face tomorrow's training with renewed vigor. Deep in slumber, a strange sensation begins to pull him back to consciousness. He stirs, feeling something unexpectedly soft and warm pressing against him in the dark, and his eyes snap open in confusion. Opening his eyes, he finds Yui hovering inches from his face, her expression a mix of longing and hesitation. She whispers a soft protest, telling him that they shouldn't be doing this, even as she remains close. The sudden intimacy sends a jolt of shock through him, especially as her hands find purchase against his chest, reinforcing her whispered, conflicted protest. He scrambles back, heart racing, as she sits before him in her floral yukata, looking uncharacteristically bold yet flustered. She quickly apologizes for the intrusion, admitting her behavior was out of bounds, but driven by a desperate need to speak with him privately. Once the initial shock subsides, they sit together in the quiet room, the tension shifting from panic to curiosity. She reveals that she has brought something important for him to receive, something she has held onto for a long time. She produces a formal envelope, explaining that she has waited for the moment he could finally wield magic to give him this. She notes that she has finally secured her father's permission to pass it on. She sits across from him in the quiet of the night, her expression uncharacteristically solemn as he stares at the envelope in his hands. He wonders if this is a formal induction into the family's magical practices, or, perhaps, a cold dismissal now that his status has changed. Upon opening the document, he finds not a scroll of techniques, but a marriage registration form already partially filled out. The shock leaves him speechless, while she remains poised, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that makes the air feel heavy. With a soft blush deepening on her cheeks, she finally breaks the silence to confess that her feelings for him have been blooming for the longest time. The vulnerability in her eyes is a stark contrast to her usual composed demeanor. He can only stammer her name in disbelief as she continues, explaining that her realization of these feelings happened years ago, hidden away until the right moment. The weight of tradition had always been the barrier. The Tenjin family's long history and high pedigree strictly forbade marriage to anyone incapable of wielding magic. However, with his recent awakening, that final obstacle has crumbled, leaving the path clear for her intentions. Overwhelmed by the release of years of suppressed emotion, she pulls him into a sudden, firm embrace, pressing his head against her as she whispers that she has been waiting for this day for as long as she can remember. He struggles against the sudden intimacy, his mind racing with the suspicion that some sort of charm or magical influence must be at play. She quickly dismisses his fears, insisting that her affection is genuine and has nothing to do with spells, even as he mourns the loss of the composed, sisterly figure he once knew. To prove the depth of her obsession, she reveals a staggering stack of papers, daily marriage registration forms she has been filling out for years to manage her stress. She beams at him, praising his honesty and hard work, her devotion bordering on the fanatical. Terrified by the sheer scale of her preparation, he tries to back away, but she pursues him relentlessly, pleading for him to understand that she is simply head over heels in love. As he flees through the corridors, she follows close behind, her breath hitching as she admits that the reserved persona she maintained until now was nothing more than a carefully constructed front. She lies there, baring her soul and admitting that the composed facade she maintained for years has finally crumbled, revealing her true self. Because she has waited so long for him to awaken his magical potential, she declares that nothing can hold her back anymore, not even the possibility that her feelings are being amplified by his magic. He can only stare up at her in stunned silence, his mind racing to process the sudden intensity of her confession. Leaning in closer with a desperate, hopeful gaze, she delivers the ultimate request, begging him to take her as his wife. The weight of her words sends him into a spiral of confusion, his breath hitching as he struggles to determine if this is a genuine expression of love or merely the side effect of his uncontrollable power. Meanwhile, she is overwhelmed by her own boldness, weeping with joy and relief as she repeatedly shouts her love for him, finally free of the secret she carried for so long. Outside, the quiet night air of the estate stands in stark contrast to the emotional storm raging within, leaving the question of whether this is true love or magical influence hanging under the light of the full moon. Yui blocks Kaido's path with a cheerful but intense smile, her eyes bright with an unsettling focus as she questions exactly where he thinks he is going. She clings to his arm with desperate fervor, her voice rising as she demands that he marry her immediately, much to his utter shock and the confusion of the surrounding students in the school courtyard. He tries to reason with her, suggesting that her sudden, overwhelming obsession must be the result of some charm magic, but she dismisses the idea instantly, insisting her feelings are perfectly normal and offering to provide undeniable proof of her long-standing devotion. To his absolute horror, she reveals a staggering mountain of scrapbooks, claiming they contain a meticulous record of every single day they have spent together over the past 10 years. She begins flipping through the pages with manic energy, excitedly pointing out embarrassing photos of him from his childhood, including moments he thought were private, while he desperately tries to get her to stop, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her stalking. The young man stands frozen as the weight of her obsession sinks in, while nearby students whisper in disbelief, wondering if even someone as refined as the legendary Tungen Senpai's relative has succumbed to his supposed ability. He pleads with her to return to her senses, his voice trembling as he realizes the gravity of the situation and the terrifying power he seems to be exerting over those around him. Seeing his genuine distress, she looks away with a hint of regret, admitting that her enthusiasm might have been excessive and expressing a quiet desire not to become a burden to him. She gently guides him to a seat, her demeanor strangely insistent as she hands him a pen and a document. He looks at her with growing suspicion, wondering aloud if the strange magical influence that had been clouding her mind has finally dissipated, or if this new behavior is something else entirely. Before he can process her response, she triumphantly declares the document signed, but his eyes widen in horror as he realizes he has just put his name on a marriage registration. In a desperate burst of defiance, he snatches the paper and rips it to shreds, much to her visible distress and disbelief. He continues to vent his frustration, insisting that the sister figure he knew would never resort to such underhanded tactics to trick him. She, however, remains undeterred, her expression hardening as she reveals a thick stack of identical forms, vowing to use every martial art trick in her repertoire to secure their union. With a sudden, explosive movement, she leaps into the air, invoking the secret techniques of her family's magical combat style. She unleashes a marriage registration barrage, a whirlwind of paper that fills the air like a storm of white petals, leaving him stunned by the sheer absurdity and scale of her commitment. As the papers continue to swirl around them, she prepares her final move, her eyes burning with a terrifyingly focused resolve. She watches as the storm of documents settles, completely encircling him in a ring of legal paperwork, before standing before him with a voice filled with a chillingly sweet certainty as she proclaims that their destiny as husband and wife is now inevitable. She watches him intently as he looks down at the ground, his breath catching as he realizes the true nature of the trap. Every single sheet of paper scattered across the floor is positioned perfectly so that his personal seal, which must have fallen from his pocket, is now resting directly on the signature line of a new form. He stands frozen as she explains the mechanics of her marriage registration deathlock, with a triumphant smile, noting that she has laid the forms out like tactical caltrops. Any movement he makes will result in his seal being pressed firmly onto the paper, legally binding them together forever. She watches in disbelief as he simply turns and walks away, his heavy footsteps landing squarely on the documents and rendering the seals invalid through sheer indifference. She collapses in tears, sobbing about his cruelty, while he can only conclude that the obsessive magic is still very much in effect. He and the young woman continue their heated exchange, their voices echoing through the school hallway. He demands an explanation for her irrational behavior, while she remains baffled that he could possibly find her desire for their marriage so difficult to comprehend. She stands before him, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and desperation as she demands to know why he continues to reject her after all her efforts. She wonders aloud if his heart already belongs to someone else, her eyes wide with the fear of that possibility. Because of her intense questioning, he struggles to find the right words, eventually admitting that there isn't necessarily someone else, though the conversation shifts to a mysterious promise made long ago to a specific person. In response to his hesitation, she pauses, her finger to her chin as she tries to recall if a specific face comes to mind that would fit the description of this promised individual. As the possibilities swirl through her mind, she begins a frantic internal deduction, wondering if it's someone he's known even longer than her, or perhaps a rival also aiming for the same high-tier status. Suddenly, a dark realization washes over her, her eyes losing their light as she focuses on a single, chilling question. Is this mysterious person someone from their very own school? She lunges forward, her face inches from his as she demands the truth with an intensity that borders on the predatory, causing him to recoil in genuine terror at her sudden shift in demeanor. Her suffocating presence is abruptly broken when a sudden gust of wind sweeps across the grounds, scattering the hundreds of marriage registration forms into the air. While she disappears into the distance, he watches in stunned silence, reflecting on how utterly unrecognizable she has become. Despite the chaos she just caused, he can't help but acknowledge her objective beauty and the qualities that would normally make her incredibly attractive, even if her current methods are overwhelming. While pondering these conflicting feelings, his thoughts unexpectedly drift toward another woman, leading him to question the true nature of his feelings for Mai, as Mocha watches his distracted expression with growing suspicion. Kaido stands alone with his thoughts, caught between the memories of his childhood friends. He looks at his hand, questioning his own heart. Does he simply want to fulfill the promise they made to stay together? Or is there a deeper desire for something more than just friendship? His internal monologue is abruptly shattered as a sudden presence makes his heart hammer against his ribs. He breaks into a cold sweat, still grappling with the weight of that unfulfilled promise and what it truly means for their future. Before he can process his feelings, Yui charges down the school corridor after him. She shouts that running away is a coward's move and refuses to let him escape this time. With a focused glare, she initiates a Tongan-style magical technique, her body blurring as she executes an ultimate stride. She covers the distance in the blink of an eye, appearing right in front of him with a force that kicks up a cloud of dust. He can only stare in disbelief at her incredible speed, realizing that when she gets serious, her strength is overwhelming. She demands that he finally stop and listen to what she has to say. The tense confrontation is suddenly interrupted when Zenji lunges from the shadows, wrapping her arms around Yui in a provocative embrace. Yui's eyes go wide with shock as she is caught completely off guard by the sudden, intimate contact. Releasing a cheerful greeting, the newcomer explains that she couldn't help but investigate the interesting ruckus they were causing. Mocha watches the scene unfold with a look of pure bewilderment as the atmosphere shifts from a chase to a chaotic social encounter. She continues to tease the flustered girl, running her hands over her and declaring that she is exactly her type. Yui struggles to maintain her composure, pleading for her to stop while Kaido watches the embarrassing display, his face turning bright red. Finally relenting, the playful woman turns her attention to the young man, informing him that he needs to be ready to use his ability to its fullest tomorrow. She decides that the teasing has reached its limit for now and declares that it is time for training to begin. She urges them not to waste any more time, revealing that the principal has granted her explicit permission to utilize his unique powers as long as she is present. He stands there, stunned by the sudden shift in priorities and the official nature of her command. Mocha narrows her eyes, a suspicion taking root that Zenji's own ability might have been influencing Yui's strange behavior all day. However, Yui remains adamant, dismissing the need for any further training or ability used by reminding everyone that they are to be married. After all, she stands confidently as the conversation turns to her sudden confession, with Zenji questioning the authenticity of her love. Kaido is visibly shaken, unable to believe that such a declaration could be genuine, while Mai calmly observes that there are no signs of magical influence. Continuing her analysis, the stoic girl explains that there is absolutely no trace of charm affecting her friend's mind. She concludes that the confession was a result of pure initiative, leaving the young man staring in wide-eyed disbelief at the weight of this revelation. Dismissing the serious discussion with a playful grin, the older woman declares that it is time to move past the talk of magic and begin a feast. While the others are caught off guard by the sudden change in tone, she insists that training and celebration must go hand in hand. He remains frozen, his mind racing as he tries to process the possibility that her feelings are real. The memories of her strange behavior and the talk of marriage flood back, forcing him to confront a reality he never expected. Suddenly, the air shifts as the blonde girl lunges forward with incredible speed, invoking the ultimate stride of the Tongan-style magical combat. She sweeps him off his feet before the others can even react, her expression one of fierce determination. Clinging to him tightly, she makes her stance clear. She will not allow anyone, not even one of the 7 sages, to take him away. This display of youthful passion only seems to entertain the observer, who watches the unfolding drama with a mischievous glint in her eye. Caught in the literal and metaphorical grip of the situation, he can feel his heart pounding against his ribs. The tension between the two women reaches a boiling point, leaving him wondering how a simple training session spiraled into such a chaotic confrontation. Mai stands her ground in the school corridor, her gaze fixed on the woman before her. She admits a grudging respect for the composure of one of the 7 sages, noting that the other woman hasn't budged an inch. However, the sage remains unimpressed, coolly stating she has no interest in such trivial entertainment. She erupts in a fit of jealousy and determination, declaring her intent to drag the young man to the city hall to finalize their marriage. In stark contrast, the older woman clings to him with a playful smirk, insisting that his training is the only priority. Caught between the two, he can only stare in wide-eyed shock as the tug-of-war begins. The struggle intensifies as she tries to pry him away, accusing her rival of being far too forward. The sage merely laughs off the idea of marriage as a dull prospect, suggesting that a more adventurous approach to life is far superior. Amidst the bickering, the boy cries out in genuine physical discomfort as he is pulled in opposite directions. A sudden, sharp impact shatters the tension, drawing everyone's attention. While the boy remains trapped in the sage's grasp, the atmosphere shifts instantly from a petty squabble to the brink of a real confrontation. Turning her focus back to the task at hand, the sage informs the boy that she will handle the situation. She plans to use the upcoming clash as a demonstration, intending to practice her charm on the surrounding crowd while she deals with the persistent student. She refuses to stand by and watch such a manipulative power be unleashed, her voice ringing out in protest. Ignoring the outburst, the sage instructs the boy to pay close attention to the feeling of the magic as it begins to stir within the air. Steeling herself for a fight, she adopts a combat stance and invokes the name of her family's martial style. The sage remains unfazed, teasingly warning her not to overreach. Meanwhile, the boy is left in a state of total bewilderment, torn between the demands of his self-proclaimed mentor and the girl who insists she is his future bride. With a fierce cry, she lunges forward, her fist glowing with intent as she delivers a strike she calls the Fist of Justice. The sage braces for the impact, the air crackling with the sudden release of magical energy. She stares in disbelief as her opponent holds up a single finger, proposing a wager where the victor claims Kaido as their prize. Before she can even process the absurd bet, the other woman lunges forward, declaring that the momentum has shifted in her favor. Watching from the sidelines, the young man is gripped by confusion, wondering if this is truly the charm ability he was warned about, or if he is witnessing a genuine, high-stakes duel between elite magic users. The challenger looms with predatory grace, fully aware of her status as one of the 7 sages, while the student realizes she is facing an unmatched talent that dwarfs even her own family's prestige. With a sharp cry, the girl strikes, her movements a blur of speed that leaves the gathered spectators struggling to keep pace with the sheer intensity of the exchange. Despite her best efforts, she finds herself unable to land a single blow, growing increasingly flustered as her opponent mocks her choice of attire and the revealing nature of her high-flying kicks. The battle takes a bizarre and humiliating turn as the sage effortlessly evades every strike, using the openings to poke and prod her opponent with shameless familiarity. Having thoroughly toyed with her target, the woman steps back with a satisfied smirk, leaving the student trembling with a mix of exhaustion and righteous indignation. She then leans in close, whispering a scandalous suggestion that they should all find a way to enjoy themselves with the boy together in the future. With a sudden, playful peck on the cheek, the sage leaves her rival completely paralyzed in shock, declaring that her affections know no boundaries of gender. She watches with a mischievous glint in her eye as her opponent breaks down in tears, wailing about being defiled. The girl's desperate cries echo across the school grounds, drawing the bewildered and shocked attention of the young man and his companions. In response to the humiliation, she drops into a low, powerful stance, her eyes burning with a desperate resolve. She announces her intent to use the 4th form of the Tengen-style magical combat, the Celestial Mantle of Fortitude, refusing to hold back against one of the 7 sages. Seeing the intensity of her preparation, the young man shouts a warning, fearing that such a lethal technique might actually kill the woman she is supposed to be learning from. He pleads with her to stop, but she remains focused, convinced that anything less than her absolute best wouldn't even scratch her opponent. The target of this impending strike simply smiles, her expression one of amused anticipation rather than fear. She welcomes the challenge, seemingly delighted by the girl's fiery spirit and willingness to engage. With a roar of determination, the girl unleashes her power, vowing to destroy anything that threatens her path to happiness. The sheer force of her magic creates a massive crater in the earth, a violent testament to the creed of her magic. She lunges forward, her fist wreathed in the destructive energy of a dragon. However, her opponent is ready, calmly invoking a specialized form of magic designed to exploit desire and sensation to counter the assault. Before the strike can land, the woman's hands become a blur of motion, executing a relentless and overwhelming series of touches that she calls the Infinity Grope. The girl's aggressive shout quickly turns into a high-pitched, incoherent cry as she is completely incapacitated by the sensory overload. Moments later, the once furious warrior is reduced to a blushing, trembling mess, her pride entirely shattered. She bows deeply, her voice quivering as she begs for further instruction, her previous animosity replaced by a sudden, intense devotion to the woman who bested her. Checking a device in her hand, the victor suddenly realizes she is late for another engagement. She casually dismisses the situation, mentioning a date with some models and preparing to depart without a second thought for the chaos she left behind. She takes to the sky, leaving the young man standing in the dust, utterly confused. He calls out, wondering what happened to his own promised training, but she only offers a cheerful farewell as she disappears into the distance. She mentions that her apprentice will arrive at any moment to look after them while she is away. The news catches the young man off guard, as he hadn't expected her to have someone else lined up to take over his training so suddenly. As she departs, she waves a cheerful goodbye, expressing her hope that they all get along well in her absence. He tries to call out to her, perhaps to ask for more details, but she is already moving on to her next engagement. Suddenly, a powerful restoration spell echoes through the air, and the massive crater in the ground is mended in an instant. Amidst the swirling energy of the repair, a new figure approaches, confirming if the young man before her is indeed Kaido Miami. The newcomer introduces herself as Ayanyam Saki, the apprentice who was just mentioned. She offers a bright, energetic greeting, while Kaido and his companions stand in stunned silence, struggling to reconcile her youthful, unassuming appearance with the high-level magic she just performed. As she stands before him, he can't help but notice her rather daring choice of attire, silently questioning the practicality of such a tight outfit for a magic wielder. She seems completely oblivious to the attention her physical presence commands, focused entirely on her new charges. The formal introduction is abruptly cut short when she loses her footing, letting out a startled cry as she tumbles forward with surprising force. She crashes directly into him, pinning him to the ground under her weight. He gasps for air, completely overwhelmed by the sudden and intimate physical contact, his mind racing to process the chaotic turn of events. Mortified by her own clumsiness, she begins to apologize frantically while still sprawled across him. He can only stare up in a daze, a sense of impending dread washing over him as he realizes that his life is about to become significantly more complicated. Moko approaches Kaido with a mix of humility and enthusiasm. She apologizes for her earlier clumsiness, but expresses her genuine excitement about being entrusted with his guidance at school. Kaido, however, is slightly bewildered by the notion of her watching over him. She quickly pivots to the task at hand, announcing her intention to instruct him in the fundamentals of magic control, specifically the activation of an ability known as charm. As they prepare to begin, her choice of attire draws immediate, startled attention from those nearby. Mai and other students whisper about the provocative nature of her form-fitting sweater, questioning who would allow such a thing on campus. Kaido finds himself caught off guard, his gaze lingering on the unexpected sight. She quickly clarifies the situation, explaining with a hint of embarrassment that she would never have chosen such a revealing outfit herself. It was forced upon her by Ayane. Kaido tries to remain composed, though he can't help but comment on how remarkably thin the fabric appears to be. Suddenly, with a soft puff of magical energy, she undergoes an instantaneous outfit change back into her standard school uniform. The sheer speed of the transformation leaves him stunned, leading him to realize that her underlying magical capacity must be far greater than he initially suspected. Without missing a beat, she grabs his hand and begins leading him toward their training area, eager to start the lesson on magic control. In her haste, a sudden gust of wind catches her skirt, prompting a panicked shout from him to watch out. Once they settle down, she explains the methodology of their training. She intends to infuse some of her own magical energy directly into him, allowing him to physically sense the flow of power. She elaborates that charm is a unique ability, characterized by a specific flow of magic that only manifests when the skill is actively triggered. He sits cross-legged on the ground as she positions herself behind him to begin the infusion. As the energy begins to circulate through his system, a sudden, sharp sensation washes over him, eliciting a startled gasp of realization. The process proves to be more intuitive than he anticipated. She encourages him, explaining that the distinct sensation around his eyes is the definitive sign that the charm ability has been successfully activated. He watches her, deeply impressed by her skill and dedication. He reflects on how patient and down-to-earth she is, finding her explanations easy to grasp despite the complexity of the magic involved. With a determined look, she announces that it is time to push their training to the next level. She channels a surge of magical energy, her form radiating a soft glow as she urges him to feel the power coursing through her. He, however, finds it impossible to concentrate on the lesson, his senses overwhelmed by her proximity and the intensity of the moment. Suddenly, the energy flares out of control, and she lets out a startled cry as the magical discharge jolts them both. Realizing the stimulation was far too intense for a beginner, she frantically checks to see if he is unharmed. She lunges forward in a panic, pinning him to the grass as she desperately apologizes for her lack of restraint. Her voice trembles with worry, promising to mend any injuries she might have caused in her overeagerness. Outside the school building, the air is filled with the echoes of her frantic apologies and his attempts to calm the chaotic situation. The structure stands silent, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil unfolding nearby. Having quickly reverted to her school uniform, she stands trembling, her eyes welling with tears as she laments her tendency to ruin everything when she gets anxious. Despite his reassurances, her attempt to cast a simple recovery spell goes awry, sending a painful jolt of electricity through him instead. Determined to redeem herself, she unleashes a barrage of spells, but her panic turns the magic into a series of disasters, from localized tornadoes to bursts of flame. He is caught in the middle of the elemental storm, crying out in pain as her recovery magic only adds to his suffering. Once the chaos subsides, she stands frozen in a state of shock, her expression blank as the weight of her failure sinks in. He stands beside her, battered but more concerned with her emotional state than his own physical pain. She finally breaks down, collapsing onto the ground and wailing in despair over her perceived incompetence. He watches her, realizing that while her magical talent is immense, her crippling anxiety and clumsiness make her a danger to herself and others. Nearby, Sam hears the commotion and grumbles in annoyance, immediately suspecting that the charm guy is at the center of another public disturbance. He heads toward the noise, frustrated by the constant racket coming from the courtyard. They arrive to find the young woman inconsolable on the grass, her identity as Yumsaki-san quickly recognized by the gathering students. Seeing her distress, they decide it is best to move her to a more private location before her breakdown attracts even more unwanted attention. He and the other onlookers peered down from the school windows, their voices a low hum of malicious gossip. They spoke of how she had supposedly been taken in by the Satome family after using a captivate ability in elementary school to trick every boy into liking her. The group continued their verbal assault from above, questioning how low someone could get by using such a seductive power. They sneered at the idea of charm and captivate working in tandem, wondering aloud what someone like her was even doing on their school grounds. Hearing their cruel words, the young woman began to tremble violently, her shoulders shaking as the weight of their judgment bore down on her. Beside her, the dark-haired boy looked on in utter confusion, struggling to understand the nature of the accusations being hurled from the windows. She looked down, tears beginning to well in her eyes as she whispered that she had never once used her ability to manipulate anyone. Despite her restraint, the reality remained that everyone hated her simply for possessing the power, assuming she would eventually use it to her advantage. Her face contorted in a mask of pure anguish, tears streaming down her cheeks as she cried out that she never even wanted this power in the first place. The unfairness of her situation manifested in a desperate, sobbing plea for understanding that seemed to fall on deaf ears. Seeing her distress, the boy reached out to comfort her, but the onlookers only grew more agitated, demanding that the pair leave the area immediately. They viewed the entire situation as a nuisance, their lack of empathy creating a wall of hostility around the two students. He finally reached his breaking point, spinning around to face the windows and roaring for them all to shut up. His sudden outburst of protective rage silenced the crowd, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity as he challenged anyone who had something to say to come down and face him directly. Without waiting for a response, the youth grabbed her hand and urged her to follow him, desperate to get her away from the toxic environment. She followed him blindly, her shock momentarily overriding her sorrow as they hurried away from the judgmental gaze of their peers. Once they reached the relative safety of a quiet hallway, he paused to catch his breath, noting with relief that the strange magical aura no longer seemed to be emanating from her. He asked for confirmation, hoping the immediate crisis had passed, and that she was finally regaining her composure. She began to explain the long history of the rumors, detailing how she had first discovered her captivate ability in the 3rd grade and had tried to hide it ever since. Despite her efforts, the stories of her supposedly seducing boys had followed her for years, a burden she had been forced to carry in silence until now. She explains that the relentless bullying eventually became too much, forcing her to stop attending school altogether until a chance encounter changed everything. Reflecting on her past, she admits that despite her desire to help others like Ayan-chan or even him, she felt she had only succeeded in making things worse. Before she can spiral further into self-doubt, he firmly interjects, telling her that she is mistaken about her own worth and that she hasn't failed at all. He continues by praising her impressive magical talent and the clarity of her teaching, noting how quickly he was able to recognize the activation of charm thanks to her guidance. Hearing this, she feels a profound sense of relief, realizing she finally has someone her own age who truly understands the burden she carries. He then makes a sincere request for her to continue as his teacher, vowing to step in and protect her should the earlier hostility from the other students resurface. A soft, hopeful light enters her eyes as she looks up at him, moved by his unexpected kindness and resolve. As they walk side by side through the quiet corridor, she confesses that his words have brought her a genuine sense of happiness. With a newfound determination, she declares her intent to overcome her fears and strive to become as strong as he is. He smiles back, promising to do everything in his power to help her master her magic, even if he makes mistakes along the way. He watches as she beams with a newfound resolve, her hands clasped over her heart as she declares her eagerness to begin their partnership and work together. This moment of connection is abruptly broken when she gasps in realization, suddenly remembering a forgotten errand at the school office regarding her transfer. As she rushes off, he is left behind, feeling his pulse quicken with a rhythmic thumping in his chest that makes him wonder if the captivate magic is still exerting its influence over him. His thoughts are interrupted when her haste proves to be her undoing, a sudden trip sending her tumbling to the floor with a sharp cry of pain as her shoe catches on the polished surface. Hearing her fall, he immediately rushes to her side, but the rescue attempt ends in a clumsy tangle of limbs. He finds himself sprawled awkwardly over her as she apologizes for her clumsiness, but their shared embarrassment is cut short by a sharp, demanding voice questioning what they are doing. Looking up, they find themselves under the stern gaze of the school's highest authority. The principal stands tall and imposing, her expression unreadable, while beside her, Mai watches the scene unfold, her usual composure replaced by a cold, silent observation. The weight of their disapproval settles heavily on him as he stammers out Mai's name in a panic, his face pale with dread while she fixes him with an icy, soul-piercing glare. The classroom hums with a mixture of curiosity and judgment as the instructor announces the arrival of a new student to the prestigious Raventier class. He notes that the student has been promoted from the hatchling tier following a decisive duel, a rare feat that draws the attention of every peer in the room. He stands at the front of the room, his face a mask of pure, sweating embarrassment as his name, Miami Kaido, is announced to the class. The weight of the sudden promotion and the intense scrutiny of his new classmates seem to overwhelm him, making the simple act of being introduced feel like a public trial. After the introduction, he finds himself reeling from the realization that Mocha vanished before he could offer a single word of explanation. He is haunted by the memory of the look she gave him earlier, an expression of hurt or betrayal that makes him desperate to find her and set things right before the misunderstanding festers. He remains lost in a dark spiral of thought, his expression hardening as he considers the damage already done. He knows that rumors will spread like wildfire after what she witnessed, and he fears that the fragile promise they shared will be shattered by the assumptions she is likely making about his character. His intense, brooding aura begins to visibly unsettle the students around him, prompting a nearby classmate to offer a nervous apology for even being in his presence. When another student tries to engage him in a conversation about the mechanics of charm magic, he snaps back with a fierce glare, his patience completely evaporated. A sudden commotion erupts outside, drawing the rest of the class to the windows in a flurry of excitement and whispers. He stays rooted to his spot, his frustration mounting as the chaotic energy of the school day continues to pull his focus away from the one person he needs to speak with. The source of the excitement is Mai, who strides through the academy courtyard with a confident, untouchable grace that leaves the student body in awe. Seeing her, he realizes this is his chance to confront the source of his current troubles and resolve the situation that has driven a wedge between him and his friend. The silver-haired instructor stands before a small assembly, receiving formal praise from the principal for her exemplary contributions to the academy's curriculum. While the principal speaks with warmth and pride about her former student's success, she maintains a cool, professional distance, her face showing no hint of emotion despite the public recognition. As she prepares to leave the gathering, he rushes forward to intercept her, demanding to know why she is acting as if nothing happened this morning. She turns on him with a sharp, biting rebuke, calling him an imbecile and flatly denying any connection to his plight, leaving him standing in the wake of her cold dismissal. He stands frozen as the instructor looms over him, her voice sharp with accusation. She demands to know if he intended to ensnare her with his charm magic, ignoring his desperate attempts to explain that he only wished to speak with her. Continuing her verbal assault, she declares her protective stance over the young girl, treating her as if she were her own daughter. She vows that she will never allow his influence to reach her, her expression one of fierce maternal defiance. In response to her public shaming, he tries to remind her that the previous incident was nothing more than a misunderstanding, but his words fall on deaf ears. She turns to the gathered students, including Sam, and loudly proclaims that he had even attempted to defile her with his magic, further tarnishing his reputation. The situation spirals into absurdity as she suddenly pulls him into a suffocatingly close embrace, laughing boisterously while the crowd looks on in shock. Amidst the physical struggle and the roar of the onlookers, he realizes that his only hope of clearing the air is to find Mocha when she is finally alone. Later, in the quiet of the break room, the instructor receives a warm welcome and a prepared lunch from the academy's staff. They encourage her to relax after what they perceive as a long and difficult day of managing the students. As she settles in, the principal offers high praise, noting that among the many students she has taught, the instructor stands out as the very best in both magic and character. Nearby, he watches from the shadows, his posture slumped as he listens to the glowing endorsement of the woman who just publicly humiliated him. He reflects on the principal's apparent vendetta against him, though he begrudgingly admits to himself that he did technically use his charm ability on her twice, even if it was unintentional. He wonders if anyone truly believes his actions were voluntary. Meanwhile, the principal maintains a surprisingly calm demeanor, suggesting to the staff that they should place some level of faith in the boy. She recalls the council meeting's decision that he would be given the opportunity to learn to control his volatile abilities. The conversation shifts when the manager brings up a specific project, reminding the instructor of her status as the agency's top talent. The instructor's eyes widen in alarm as she realizes the direction the discussion is taking. The manager's vision of a swimsuit-themed promotional campaign fills the air, promising record-breaking sales for the Academy's Ice Queen. The instructor, however, is left in a state of utter disbelief, her usual composure shattered by the prospect of such a public and revealing assignment. As she and the principal departed, Kaido found himself alone in the office, realizing this was his moment to act. He considered using a warp hole to reach the parking lot and retrieve the proposal from his car, though the thought of Maimai's impending gravure project weighed heavily on his mind, a fate he felt he couldn't allow to happen. Outside the office, the atmosphere was far less tranquil as the principal's discipline began, leaving Maimai howling in protest. The principal remained unmoved, questioning why the instructor was still pursuing the girl and declaring that such behavior would be penalized, regardless of any magical barriers meant to keep out pests. The sound of the struggle echoed through the academy's grand architecture, a sharp cry piercing the air. The principal's voice carried a final, stern command, ordering her to stay put and behave until a final decision regarding her punishment was reached. Watching from a distance, he felt the weight of his own predicament, staring at the imposing school building. He found the order to stay put nearly impossible to follow, wondering how he could possibly get close to Maimai or even speak to Mocha given the current state of affairs. He turned away from the imposing structure, his mind racing with the implications of the principal's mysterious plans. While he dreaded whatever was in store for him, he knew that his immediate priority had to be finding Mocha, even if it meant facing her after the morning's disaster. His resolve hardened as he considered the task ahead, his expression turning serious. He planned not only to explain the truth of the morning's incident, but also to dispel the rumors surrounding him, wanting her to know that his dreams and goals remained unchanged. Suddenly, he caught sight of his target in the distance, walking through the arched corridors of the academy. Realizing this might be his last chance, he knew it was now or never to make his move before she disappeared again. He hurried toward them, catching Mocha just as she was being escorted away by the principal. Mocha looked back with a start, assuring a concerned Mai that she would be fine as the principal insisted on accompanying her back to her residence. Breathless, he began his desperate explanation, pleading with her not to get the wrong idea about the morning's events. He stammered through an apology, insisting that what had happened was a complete accident and that he never intended for things to go so far. Despite his racing heart, he pushed forward with his confession, his voice trembling with nerves. He desperately wanted to fulfill the promise they had made and prove that the rumors about him were false, even as he struggled to find the right words while standing directly in front of her. He is abruptly cast aside, the principal's foot making sharp contact as she demands he leave. She berates him for being a nuisance, reminding him of Mocha's celebrity status and questioning why he persists in following her everywhere. After the harsh dismissal, he lies face down on the pavement, defeated. The principal continues her lecture, guiding Mocha away and insisting that even she had warned against further contact. Mocha casts a silent, lingering look back at him as she is led toward the academy. While he remains on the ground, a shadow falls over him. Mai stands there, looking down with a mix of confusion and authority. She questions why he is idling about instead of attending the council meeting she had previously mentioned. She then shifts her focus, her expression hardening with a sudden, fierce ambition. With unwavering confidence, she declares her ultimate goal, to ascend and become one of the legendary 7 sages. This declaration leaves him stunned, his eyes wide as he processes her words. She adds a final, pointed reminder, telling him not to think for a second that she has forgotten the promise they once made. In response, he scrambles to his feet, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to explain himself. He insists that he has been pursuing that very same dream all along, and that the morning's chaotic events were nothing more than a misunderstanding. He vehemently denies any intention of building a harem or using his charms improperly. Seeing his renewed fire, she offers a sharp, encouraging grin and a confident thumbs up. Her simple words of support act as a sudden spark, validating his resolve. He watches her go, standing before the grand architecture of the academy with a newfound sense of purpose. The weight of his goals seems to settle on his shoulders, replacing his earlier despair with a quiet determination. Meanwhile, the principal continues to lead Mocha away, her tone dismissive and cold. She scoffs at the talk of dreams and promises, treating them as nothing more than the idle fantasies of a troublesome student. Just as he begins to find his footing, the agency manager rushes toward him, her face pale with urgency. She delivers a crushing blow of reality, reminding him that his contract strictly forbids any romantic entanglements or even casual contact with the opposite gender, leaving him reeling from this new obstacle. He is suddenly consumed by a new, burning ambition, shouting for Mocha to teach him magic control immediately so he can join the 7 sages. While he is buoyed by the realization that Mai truly remembered their childhood promise, Mocha tries to interject with a desperate warning, urging him to forget his excitement because of some dire news. He can only stare in shock as she finally manages to deliver the crushing blow. The principal's fury has reached its limit, and he has been officially barred from setting foot on the school grounds. She adds that the situation is even more dire than he realized, leaving him reeling from the sudden expulsion. This exile leads them to a dilapidated, broken-down night guard shack deep within the woods, which is to serve as his temporary residence. He sighs, accepting this as his punishment, while she explains that he must remain here until he can fully master his charm ability to prevent any further incidents. As they stand before their new home, she becomes visibly flustered, her face flushing a deep crimson as she reveals the final condition of his stay. To ensure he is properly monitored, she is required to accompany him and stay by his side 24 hours a day, a prospect that leaves both of them reeling at the sudden intimacy of their situation. Kaido and Mocha stand in the center of a sparsely furnished room, the weight of their new living arrangement hanging in the air. A large ball sits on the floor between them, and the text establishes that their hearts are racing as they begin this forced cohabitation. He looks away, his expression a mix of embarrassment and resolve. He explains that they aren't permitted to leave this place until he manages to gain full control over his charm ability, a task that feels daunting given their current proximity. The realization of their isolation sinks in, and both of them blush deeply, their eyes wide with a sudden, shared nervousness. The silence in the room is heavy with the unspoken implications of being stuck together in such an intimate setting. Breaking the tension, Mocha clenches her fists and vows to do her absolute best to help him, despite her own uncertainty. He responds with equal fervor, shouting his thanks as they both try to mask their flustered states with sheer determination. They immediately set to work tidying the cluttered space, but the domestic effort quickly turns chaotic. A sudden crash and a startled scream echo from within the house, suggesting a clumsy mishap as they navigate their new environment. After the initial flurry of activity, they finally settle down at a small table, the quiet of the night visible through the window. He reflects on the trouble he's caused her, wondering aloud what their next steps should be now that they can finally catch their breath. She sits on the floor, her back to him as she recounts a conversation she had about their situation. She mentions that when she shared the news with her contact, the response was unexpectedly positive, which only adds to the awkwardness of their predicament. He reacts with shock and disbelief at her suggestion that he should practice his charm ability on her. She explains that she was told he should use the power on her until he gets used to it. Her face flushed as she delivers the startling proposal. Standing up to illustrate her point, she poses a question about the fundamental nature of his powers. She asks him to distinguish between charm and captivate, seeking to turn their awkward situation into a structured lesson on magical theory. She suddenly dons a preposterous disguise, a massive afro, swirling glasses, and a cape, while shaking maracas with forced enthusiasm. The sight leaves him reeling in utter confusion, his voice cracking as he demands to know what on earth she is doing. In response to his shock, she calmly explains that her current state is a demonstration of her power in action. He remains skeptical, unable to grasp how such a ridiculous costume could possibly relate to the nature of his own burgeoning abilities. She begins a detailed lecture, clarifying that while Captivate relies on a target's personal preferences and the user's natural appeal, his charm is far more absolute, forcing an attraction the moment eyes meet. He listens intently, the gravity of the distinction finally starting to sink in. This realization leads him to understand that a Captivate user is tethered to their appearance, whereas she has intentionally stripped away all her charm to prove a point. She strikes a pose in her absurd outfit, declaring that her lack of appeal is exactly why he feels no magical pull toward her at this moment. As the lesson continues, he admits that the sheer power of charm sounds increasingly dangerous. She counters this fear with a steady gaze, insisting that magic itself is neutral. The true danger lies not in the power, but in the character of the person who wields it. Looking him directly in the eye, she offers a final piece of reassurance. She promises that as long as he chooses to use his gift for the right reasons, he has nothing to fear from the strength of his own magic. He finds himself moved by her conviction and offers a genuine, warm smile in return. The sincerity of his gratitude catches her off guard, causing her to momentarily lose her composure. Suddenly overwhelmed by her own boldness, she begins to stammer apologies, worried that she sounded far too arrogant. He tries his best to soothe her, urging her to stay calm as her face flushes with embarrassment. The mental strain of the demonstration finally takes its toll, and she begins to sway, her eyes spinning as she mutters about needing fresh air. He reaches out in alarm, sensing that she is about to collapse from the exertion. Before he can steady her, she loses her footing entirely and tumbles forward. He manages to catch her, but the momentum leaves them in a tangled, compromising heap on the floor. She remains slumped against him, the weight of her exhaustion palpable as they both stammered apologies, each trying to take the blame for the awkward collapse. As they regained their footing, he felt the heat rise to his face, his mind racing with the realization that being alone with her under the same roof was becoming more than he could handle. Sensing his discomfort, she began to explain the root of her hesitation, revealing that the trauma from when her abilities first manifested had left her with a deep-seated fear of men. Even though she acknowledged his kindness, the young woman confessed that the prospect of him using charm on her still filled her with dread, regardless of the instructions they had been given. He immediately validated her feelings, insisting that her fear was completely justified, which only led her to apologize further for what she perceived as her own selfishness. While he pondered the inherent dangers of practicing such a volatile ability in private, the ceiling light above them suddenly groaned and flickered violently. With a sharp crack, the room plunged into darkness, leaving him stumbling in the shadows while she called out in concern for his safety. In the sudden void, she felt a strange, searing heat erupt within her, her senses overwhelmed by a burning sensation that seemed to consume her entire being. Unaware of her internal struggle, he fumbled through the pitch-black room, wondering if his own clumsy movements had caused the blackout, all while desperately trying to find her in the gloom. His hand finally made contact with something soft and warm, but the muffled gasp that escaped her lips made him realize, with a jolt of horror, exactly where his hand had landed. She is suddenly enveloped in a strange, shimmering aura, her expression shifting from shock to a dazed, flushed look. Kaido recoils, realizing this is the first time he's seen her like this, as a faint steam seems to rise from her skin. Because of this strange transformation, she leans in close, her eyes glazed with an unnatural heat as she confesses that her body feels flushed and strangely good. She even suggests that he might just be her type. Her usual reserve completely vanished. In response, he scrambles backward, his mind racing with the realization that she has been affected by some kind of charm ability. Despite his panic, she continues to press forward, looming over him and demanding to know his true feelings about her. She continues her uncharacteristic advance, noting that while she might not be the smartest, she possesses a deep confidence in her own physical form. The intimacy of their isolation only seems to embolden her further. As she turns, emphasizing her figure, she bluntly asks if he likes her, leaving him paralyzed with indecision and internal screaming. Moments later, she offers a tempting proposition, claiming she would do anything for him if he would only admit his feelings. Suddenly, the reality of the room seems to warp as she appears before him in a provocative nurse's uniform, leaning down to ask if the look suits her. He can only stare in disbelief, his composure completely shattered by the absurdity of the situation. She leans in even closer, her voice a soft murmur as she confesses that the opinion of the rest of the world matters little to her. Her only desire is for him to like her more than anyone else. The hallucination intensifies, surrounding him with multiple versions of her in various outfits, from gym clothes to a maid's uniform, all of them clamoring for him to choose his favorite. Finally, he snaps back to his senses, shielding his eyes as he realizes the gravity of the situation. He knows there is no time to waste, and that he must find a way to break the charm before things escalate any further. While she stands nearby, still lost in her daze, he clutched the small vial, his resolve hardening. This was the only way to end the madness. He had to put her to sleep before things went any further, and the situation became irreversible. But before he could act, the air seemed to shift, and she stood before him transformed into a vision of dark temptation, clad in a revealing black ensemble complete with feline ears and a tail. She explained with a playful tilt of her head that this was a gift intended for the moment she chose to claim someone as her own, asking him how he liked the new look. The shock of her appearance caused the vial to slip from his fingers, shattering his plan as his own willpower began to crumble. He realized with growing dread that he was losing his grip on reality and needed to act fast before his conscience faded entirely. She felt a strange heat rising within her, a flush that matched the impish smile playing on her lips. The realization of the sheer power this new form granted her over others was intoxicating, making her feel as though she could bring anyone to their knees with just a glance. He fought to maintain his composure, recognizing the overwhelming force of her captivate ability, even as she confessed her inner turmoil. She admitted that while the charm had exposed her true nature, her interest in him had been growing for some time, and she was no longer willing to hide it. Dropping to the floor, she crawled toward him with a predatory grace, her voice dropping to a whisper as she offered herself completely to his whims. She called him her master, pleading for him to use her however he saw fit in this moment of shared vulnerability. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs as she leaned in closer, her eyes locked onto his. She promised to provide undeniable proof of the depth of her sincerity, leaving no room for doubt about her intentions. Looking into her eyes, he found himself mesmerized, unable to look away as her features took on a soft, irresistible allure. He noted with a start that she was beginning to look truly beautiful, a realization that tested the very limits of his restraint. As their faces drew inches apart, the world outside the room ceased to exist, leaving him trapped in a spiral of panic and desire. He felt there was no longer any way to suppress the magic or the feelings it had unearthed as the inevitable moment of contact loomed. Kaido is frozen, his breath hitching as he stares at the girl's lips, which are mere inches from his own. The internal battle rages. He knows he should pull away, but the magnetic pull of the moment is nearly impossible to resist. He realizes with a jolt of panic that her captivate magic is warping his willpower, making every instinct scream at him to give in. To do so, however, would be a complete betrayal of the trust she has placed in him, a thought that sends his heart racing in his chest. The young woman leans in further, her voice a soft, hypnotic murmur as she calls him master. The sheer intensity of her gaze and the proximity of her touch push him to the absolute brink of his self-control. A sudden vision of Mai's encouraging face cuts through the haze of his desire, serving as a sharp reminder of the person he strives to be. He manages to wrench himself away, the thought of Mai's unwavering support giving him the strength to break the spell. He understands now that a kiss stolen under the influence of charm magic would be a hollow victory he could never truly live with. A boisterous woman suddenly crashes into the room, waving a bottle and shouting a loud, drunken greeting that shatters the lingering tension. She seems completely unfazed by the awkward situation she has stumbled upon, her energy filling the small space instantly. She gleefully snaps a photo of the stunned pair before deciding that she is clearly an unwanted third wheel. With a mischievous grin and a casual wave, she makes a quick exit, leaving a trail of confusion in her wake. The intruder's confidence quickly evaporates into a frantic yell as she realizes the gravity of the situation she's involved in. She pleads to be left out of the impending chaos, her previous excitement replaced by a desperate desire for distance. She eventually settles down to discuss the dangerous synergy between charm and captivate magic with him. They both acknowledge the narrow escape they had, noting that things could have ended very differently if the girl hadn't been rendered unconscious. The mysterious visitor leans in, her expression a mix of amusement and mock sternness as she questions Kaido about his recent absence from training. Mocha watches the exchange with wide-eyed surprise, while Kaido attempts to explain his side of the story regarding his sudden disappearance. She suddenly bursts into dramatic, exaggerated wails, lamenting how the principal summoned her specifically to reprimand her for his lack of basic manners. Kaido can only stare in disbelief, shocked that the school administration went to such lengths to contact his mentor over his behavior. While she takes a long, unbothered swig from her bottle, he looks away, a wave of guilt washing over him as he realizes he should have heeded Mai's warnings. The woman mentions that she was ultimately let off with a stern reminder to prioritize his education and ensure he stops using his abilities inappropriately. Seeing his distress, Mocha tries to offer some comfort, suggesting that the situation might not be as dire as it seems. However, the mentor punctuates her apology for the chaos with a sharp, sudden strike to the top of Kaido's head, her drunken demeanor shifting between contrition and physical discipline. She leans back slightly, a playful yet knowing glint in her eyes as she reminds him of her role in his life as his mentor. Kaido remains silent, feeling the weight of her presence and the authority she holds over his training and development. Suddenly, she closes the distance between them again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she asks if his feelings for Mai go beyond mere professional respect. The blunt question catches him completely off guard, sending a jolt of visible panic through his frame. She watches his reaction as he stammers in response, his face flushing while he tries to understand how she reached such a conclusion. She counters by revealing that the principal mentioned his attempt to use his powers on Mai, but her own intuition tells her there is a deeper, unspoken connection between the two. Leaning in even further, she notes that the atmosphere between them during the recent council meeting was undeniably suspicious. Kaido finds himself trapped by her gaze and her proximity, his heart racing as she probes for the truth behind his interactions with the instructor. She grabs him firmly, pulling him into her personal space while demanding a full explanation of his relationship with Mai. He desperately protests, insisting that there is absolutely nothing going on, but his frantic denials only seem to fuel her growing suspicion. She pulls him into a rough headlock because of his stubborn refusal to talk, playfully but painfully grinding her fist into his scalp. Kaido cries out in frustration and physical discomfort, his mind racing with the fear that any slip-up could jeopardize Mai's standing and reputation if the truth were to come out. He is pinned beneath the boisterous visitor, who looms over him with a mischievous glint in her eyes and a bottle in hand. She playfully threatens to make him confess everything, ignoring his visible shock as she declares the party is only just beginning. Because of his obvious discomfort, she leans in closer, suggesting a practice session to prepare him for his time with Mai. Despite his frantic insistence that he is fine, she dismisses his protests, determined to ensure he doesn't fail during his first real attempt. Moments later, the situation escalates as she begins to pull her oversized sweater over her head, much to his horror. He shouts for her to stop, but she merely laughs at his flustered reaction, revealing her black lace lingerie and asking him how she looks. As the alcohol takes hold, she takes a long swig from the bottle, her expression one of pure, uninhibited bliss. In response to the sheer absurdity of the moment, he clutches his head in his hands, his mind racing as he tries to process the chaotic turn of events. Suddenly, she lunges forward and pins him to the floor, her weight pressing down on him as she looms over his face. She whispers a daring promise to teach his body wonderful things, vowing to make him forget all about the person he loves. With a sultry smile, she stares directly into his eyes, telling him to prepare for the experience of a lifetime. The intensity of her gaze causes his face to flush a deep crimson, a detail she doesn't hesitate to tease him about. He stands frozen, wondering if he is once again falling under the influence of the captivate magic that has plagued him before. Before he can find an answer, she pulls him into a suffocating embrace, pressing his face against her chest to demonstrate the reality of a grown woman's body. His muffled protests are ignored as she continues her relentless teasing, treating him like a flustered child. As the encounter reaches its peak, a shimmering magical aura surrounds her, and her appearance begins to shift. To his absolute shock, she transforms into a perfect likeness of Mai, leaning over him with a playful grin and asking him to guess who she is now. She continues her relentless teasing, leaning in close while wearing nothing but lacy black lingerie. With a mischievous glint in her eyes, she suggests that she could even take the form of the girl he truly desires in such a provocative pose, questioning if he isn't at least a little bit excited by the prospect. Because of this blatant provocation, he recoils in a panic, his face flushed with embarrassment as he shouts for her to stop immediately. She, however, only finds his flustered reaction more amusing, her laughter echoing through the room. Moments later, he tries to steady his breathing, realizing the gravity of his situation. He knows he must stay out of their sight until the magical charm wears off, fearing that if Mocha is also being coerced by this magic, there is no way he will be able to resist. As the chaos unfolds, his attention shifts to a new presence as Mocha suddenly appears, now dressed in a revealing, dark cat-themed costume. She gazes up at him with an uncharacteristic intensity, demanding that he look only at her and accusing him of being mean for leaving her alone. In response, the visitor reappears behind him, noting with interest that the hypnotic fragrance seems to have been broken. She doesn't seem bothered by the competition, instead suggesting that the more people involved, the more enjoyable the situation becomes. The two women then begin to vie for his attention, with Mocha firmly declaring that she won't give him up to anyone, not even to this newcomer. The visitor counters, playfully complaining that such a monopoly hardly seems fair. Seeing that neither is willing to back down, they lock eyes with a shared, competitive resolve. They decide to turn the situation into a game, challenging each other to see who can claim him first. He watches them in sheer terror, his heart racing as he realizes that the situation has spiraled completely out of his control. He wonders which of them will make the first move, knowing that he is utterly defenseless against their combined advances. Finally, both girls loom over him, their gaze is heavy with a predatory heat that leaves him feeling completely trapped. He realizes with a sinking feeling that he is in deep trouble as they prepare for a simultaneous attack. Kaido finds himself trapped between two alluring figures, Mocha in her dark bunny suit, and the mysterious visitor in her lingerie. Both seem intent on seeing who can capture his attention first. The atmosphere is thick with a temptation that feels almost overwhelming. He recoils in shock as they both beckon him closer. He wonders how he's supposed to endure such a situation, feeling like they are using every trick in the book to lure him in. The prospect of a first kiss looms over him, adding to his growing panic. They press in from both sides, their proximity leaving him breathless. Mocha insists that he must prefer her, while the other woman challenges him to admit whose presence he enjoys more. He is caught in a literal and metaphorical squeeze. The physical contact intensifies, with one claiming her softness is superior while the other boasts of her firmness. He can barely breathe, let alone think clearly, as their competitive advances continue without pause. He pleads for them to stop, his mind reaching its breaking point. However, they ignore his protests. The visitor suggests he just let go and let her take care of him, while Mocha demands his exclusive attention, warning him not to look at anyone else. She suddenly takes a more assertive stance, straddling him and demanding he acknowledge that she is the one he truly wants. The other woman tries to intervene, claiming Mocha has had her turn, but the young woman refuses to back down from her position. The visitor doesn't give up, continuing her tactile assault. She remarks that asking nicely only gets one so far and begins to rub against him, asking how it feels. He is completely pinned down, his pleas for them to stop falling on deaf ears. The sensory overload continues as they announce their next moves, alternating between different forms of physical closeness. His muffled protests are lost in the chaotic energy of their competition for his affection. He is finally at his absolute limit. Both his brain and his body are exhausted, and he realizes he won't be able to hold out much longer against this relentless onslaught of affection and temptation. He stands frozen, caught between the two women as they observe his lack of response and wonder aloud what their next move should be, noting that he doesn't seem to be enjoying the situation at all. He is loomed over by the two women, their presence suffocating as they decide it is time to move on to first base, while he stares up in total shock, his mind racing as the situation escalates. He watches in shock as she suddenly lunges forward, her eyes wide with a desperate intensity as she claims his first kiss for herself, refusing to let anyone else take it despite his protests. She is momentarily halted as he is pulled back, caught in the middle of their competitive advances as the visitor playfully decides to let her have this victory. He feels the room grow smaller as she pins him down, the visitor watching from the side with a mischievous grin while they tell him this is a moment he will cherish for the rest of his life. She softens her gaze but remains incredibly focused, her face inches from his as she whispers that she is going to show him exactly how serious her feelings are. She feels him struggle beneath her, his heart hammering as he realizes he is completely immobilized and desperately calls out her name, begging her to wake up from her trance. He hears a strange sound fill the air, and the intense heat of the moment seems to dissipate as she blinks in confusion, the predatory gleam in her eyes fading. She recoils, her face flushing a deep crimson as the reality of her actions sinks in, and she questions what could have possibly driven her to such extremes. She sees him breathe a sigh of relief, realizing she has finally returned to her senses, but the danger remains as he is warned that the visitor is still right behind him. He watches in confusion as the woman suddenly pales, her hand flying to her mouth as she groans about an impending wave of nausea. A violent, guttural sound erupts from her, echoing through the room as she loses control. Doubled over and gasping, she continues to retch, muttering a regretful realization that she had indulged in far too much alcohol. The situation takes a grotesque turn as she heaves directly onto the girl pinned beneath her, leaving the young man staring in absolute, speechless horror. Moments later, the woman stands up, wiping her mouth and declaring herself refreshed, already contemplating her next bottle while reaching for the light switch. As the lights flicker on, he remains paralyzed with shock, while the girl beside him trembles uncontrollably. The visitor, oblivious to their trauma, casually asks if she missed something. His mind is a whirlwind of frantic thoughts, fixating on the sensation of her lips and the crushing realization that his first kiss happened under such chaotic, accidental circumstances. He spiraled into a panic, certain that she must despise him now, and when the woman offered to untie him and asked about the charm's effect, he desperately shouted that nothing had occurred. The woman laughed, admitting she had stayed quiet just to watch the drama unfold even after her magic faded, which brought him a small, secret relief that she hadn't witnessed the actual contact. Elsewhere, a young student reacts with wide-eyed disbelief to a shocking rumor, questioning if he has truly been exiled from the school campus. The woman with long, light hair, now stripped down to a dark bikini, leans in close to Kaido, claiming her role as his wife and promising to handle the principal immediately. He stands frozen, his face a mask of pure shock as he stammers out her name, Yuine, unable to process her sudden change in attire and attitude. Because of this brazen display, Mocha's composure shatters completely. She looms over the two women, the one in the bikini and another dressed in a revealing bunny suit, her face darkened with a terrifying, shadow-cast rage. She demands to know what they think they are doing dressed so provocatively, labeling them depraved vixens for strutting around in such outfits without a shred of pride. In response to the tension, she suddenly shifts her demeanor, turning to Kaido with a bright, reassuring smile. She tells him not to worry, insisting that she knows he isn't the one at fault for this scandalous situation, while he tries desperately to explain that there is a logical reason for the chaos unfolding around them. Moments later, she pulls him into a tight, possessive embrace, burying his face against her chest to shield him from the others. She whispers that those two must have been trying to trick him because of his innocence. Even as she claims to be his wife and promises to turn a blind eye to his flirting as long as he always returns to her, Kaido remains trapped in her grasp, overwhelmed by her sudden intensity. As the chaos unfolded, her attention shifted back to the two intruders, her aura turning cold and murderous. She points a finger at them, declaring that her destruction will be swift and merciless for those who dare lay hands on her husband. The woman in the bikini merely smiles, seemingly amused by the threat and wondering how she might be punished. Meanwhile, his mind is a whirlwind of confusion as he realizes that Mocha still hasn't mentioned the accidental kiss. He trembles, wondering if he should be the one to apologize and clear the air, but he's terrified that bringing it up might make things even worse given her current volatile state. Suddenly, The silence is broken as they both burst out in a panicked, simultaneous shout. They desperately insist to the others that the kiss was nothing more than a complete and total accident. Their faces flushed with deep embarrassment as they try to justify the event before it can be misinterpreted further. This frantic admission causes the woman in the bikini to freeze, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She repeats the word kiss in disbelief, realizing that something far more significant than mere flirting occurred while she wasn't looking, sparking a new wave of jealousy and intrigue. He slowly opens his eyes, the morning light filtering into the room as he tries to shake off the grogginess of a deep sleep. A voice calls out to him, noting his return to consciousness, which only adds to his confusion as he struggles to remember exactly when he drifted off. Standing over him, she maintains a stern expression while effortlessly hoisting a heavy 10-kilogram weight, her presence both domestic and strangely menacing. She dismisses his confusion, insisting that breakfast will be ready shortly and that he should simply wait patiently for now. She watches as he questions the events of the previous day, prompting a flurry of explanations from those gathered around him. They remind him of his sudden collapse, a detail he seems to have completely lost in the fog of his memory. He is pressed for details about a rumored kiss, but she cuts through the noise with a sharp explanation, attributing his blackout to the total depletion of his magical reserves. She suggests that the strain of using his charm ability was simply too much for his body to handle. She turns her attention to the rest of the group, beginning to categorize them with biting labels and singling out one as a potential intruder in her domestic life. She demands a full confession, her tone leaving no room for evasion as she asserts her dominance over the situation. Her intense interrogation sends a wave of terror through the younger girl, who trembles at the thought of what might have transpired while he was unconscious. She pleads for mercy, her imagination running wild with dark possibilities of the torture he might have endured. The girl's fear is ignored as her jealousy finally boils over into a lethal display of possessiveness, drawing a blade with eyes wide with manic intensity. She issues a chilling warning to anyone who would dare approach the man she has already claimed as her husband. She ignores his frantic protests that they are not married and breaks down into tears, mourning the loss of a meticulously planned future. Her grief is as sharp as the knife she still clutches, leaving the room thick with a volatile mix of heartbreak and danger. She swings the blade with a wild, desperate energy, her voice cracking as she laments the perceived ruin of her life. Kaido recoils in sheer terror, his mind racing as he watches the girl he knows transform into someone unrecognizable, while Mai stands by, witnessing the escalating madness. Desperate to de-escalate the situation, he points to his cheek, frantically explaining that the contact was nothing more than an accidental graze while he was merely trying to help someone who had fallen. He insists it was a complete accident, his eyes wide with the hope that logic might pierce through her rage. While he maintains his outward plea, he secretly hopes this small fabrication will be enough to settle her nerves, though the weight of the deception lingers in his mind. She stands frozen, her expression unreadable as she processes his words, the sharp edge of the knife still glinting in the light. He attempts to break the tension with a forced, nervous laugh, apologizing for not speaking up sooner because of how angry she seemed. Mai watches the awkward display with a look of disbelief, while the silence from the other girl becomes increasingly heavy. However, the attempt at levity fails utterly as she turns back with a chilling, vacant stare, the knife held firmly in her grasp. With a terrifyingly calm resolve, she declares that regardless of the circumstances, her intent to eliminate the girl who touched him remains unchanged. Seeing her resolve harden, he shouts after her, demanding she hand over the weapon and stop this madness. She begins to walk away, her back turned to him as she coldly states that the distinction between a graze and a kiss matters little to her. The betrayal is absolute, and forgiveness is not an option. He continues to plead, his voice rising in desperation as he begs her to realize that it truly wasn't a significant event and to just let the matter drop. She pauses, her silhouette tense, as his words seem to strike a chord of deep-seated pain rather than reason. Turning slightly, she reveals the depth of her heartbreak, explaining how she had suppressed her own feelings in anticipation of a future where they could finally be together. The mention of marriage catches him completely off guard, the gravity of her expectations finally becoming clear. Tears begin to well in her eyes as she explains that for someone like her, even the smallest gesture of intimacy carries the weight of a sacred vow. To her, there is no such thing as a minor kiss. It is a fundamental breach of the bond she believed they shared. With a final, stinging declaration of estrangement, she storms off, leaving him standing in the wake of her emotional storm. Mai approaches him, checking on his well-being, but he remains rooted to the spot, stunned by the sudden and total collapse of their relationship. He stands in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on him as Mai expresses her concern for the girl who fled in tears. He realizes with a pang of guilt that he has yet to offer a sincere explanation, and he cannot allow this painful misunderstanding to persist any longer. Turning to his companion, he offers a somber apology for the impulsive kiss and the unintended influence of his magical charm. He explains that he must leave immediately to find Yui and set things right, leaving the other girl blinking in stunned silence at his sudden admission. She erupts in a frantic, high-pitched panic, her face flushing a deep crimson as she waves her hands dismissively. She desperately pleads with him to strike the entire incident from his memory, insisting that her reaction was merely a byproduct of the charm and not a reflection of her true character. Still reeling from the embarrassment, she hides her face while he offers a final, awkward farewell before departing. He walks away, leaving her alone to process the chaotic whirlwind of the last few minutes. Alone now, her heart hammers against her ribs with a deafening rhythm that she can't seem to quiet. She clutches her hands to her chest, her face still burning with a heat that refuses to dissipate. She stares into the distance, admitting to herself that the memory of his touch won't be easily erased. In the quiet of the moment, she finally acknowledges the truth in the warnings she had previously dismissed. Meanwhile, he finds the object of his search slumped over a wooden table outside a quiet building, her posture radiating a profound sense of defeat. He calls out her name softly, his voice tinged with hesitation as he approaches. He stands over her, his shadow falling across her trembling form as he voices his regret for being so inconsiderate of her emotions. She remains motionless, her head buried in her arms, as if trying to shut out the world and his presence along with it. Without looking up, she begins to speak, her voice muffled but thick with the pain of shattered expectations. She recounts the simple future she had envisioned for them, one of marriage and shared happiness, before his sudden rise in status brought a swarm of other women into their lives, culminating in the sight of another girl kissing him. She continues her confession, her hands resting tensely in her lap as she admits how much his initial declaration of love had meant to her. However, that joy has been replaced by a bitter doubt, as she now fears his feelings were never genuine, but merely the artificial result of the very charm he wields. She listens as he reflects on their decade together in the Tenjin household, explaining that he has always viewed her as the dependable older sister he could rely on, a constant presence in his life. Because of his admission, she slumps forward, her face hidden against the surface as she confesses that his words make it difficult for her to see him as anything more than family. In response to the heavy atmosphere, she suddenly demands that he pat her on the head, insisting that she is in a deep slump and needs to be told she is a good girl. He hesitates, struck by the sight of her vulnerability, a side he has never witnessed before, and softly apologizes as he reaches out to fulfill her request. Suddenly, she seizes his arm with surprising strength, declaring that her time for playing around is over, and that she was naive to think their path to marriage would be simple once he mastered magic. Rising to her feet, the young woman stands tall, her gaze burning with a new resolve as she forbids him from calling her by her sisterly title ever again, demanding to be known simply as Yui. Before he can process this shift, she mentions the kiss they shared and cryptically suggests that she is about to make things even between them. Without another word, she pulls him into a deep kiss, challenging him to tell her if he can still look at her as just an older sister now that she has claimed him in such a way. Breaking the contact, she pulls back with a triumphant, playful expression, leaving him breathless as she asks if he finally sees her as a woman rather than a sibling. The moment is shattered when Kiera and Mocha burst into the room with high energy, announcing a trip to the beach and leaving him to wonder why his life has become so chaotic. The sun beats down on the sparkling sea as Yui and Mai rush toward the water, their excitement palpable. Yui shouts out in joy at the sight of the vast ocean, her long black hair catching the light. Behind them, Kaido stands on the sand, looking far less enthusiastic about their sudden arrival at the beach. He stands there, arms crossed, questioning why they have returned to this place. Yui, however, is quick to dismiss his concerns, reminding him that this excursion is a vital part of their training and that he should simply listen to her instructions. As she finishes her explanation, Kiera suddenly makes her presence known with a playful wink, revealing that this private island actually belongs to her. She explains that here, away from the prying eyes of the school administration, they are free to use their charm abilities as much as they wish, turning what was supposed to be a rigorous training session into an excuse for some fun in the sun. The young man is visibly stunned by her unexpected appearance, his jaw dropping as he demands to know why she is even there. She, meanwhile, remains perfectly composed, lounging comfortably on a beach chair and telling him to let bygones be bygones. She continues, admitting that while she lost a significant number of fans following their recent duel, she couldn't care less about the fallout. She reveals that because the incident with the charm was deemed an unforeseen circumstance, she was granted an exception and allowed to maintain her current rank. Nearby, Mocha joins the conversation, her eyes gleaming as she calculates how many new followers she'll gain from the selfies she takes with Kiera. Kaido, however, is caught off guard when the talk shifts to a trial and partners, his confusion only deepening as the girls discuss their roles. The blonde woman clarifies the situation, explaining that the principal has set a condition for their return to school. They must perform exceptionally well in the upcoming trial. This trial, she reveals, is actually the midterm evaluation for the Raven Tier class, a high-stakes combat battle royale where students must compete in teams of 3. She then leans in, telling him to focus on how to best utilize his abilities to ensure their victory. He looks on in shock as she confirms that he will have both her and Yui supporting him as his teammates for the grueling challenge ahead. Kiera lays out the ground rules for the upcoming trial, emphasizing that the first priority is mastering the activation and deactivation of their unique abilities. She warns them that they need to think practically about how to apply these skills during the actual combat, rather than just relying on raw power. As the instructions continue, Yui becomes visibly flustered when the conversation shifts to her relationship with Kaido and the group's lack of cohesion. She insists on being called simply by her name, dropping the formal honorifics, while Kiera continues to tease her about their supposed lack of chemistry despite their history together. She then takes her teasing to a physical level, playfully accosting the embarrassed girl in front of the others. Kiera boldly claims that she will be the only one developing any real intimacy today, ignoring the frantic protests as she continues her tactile assault. After the brief distraction, the group is abruptly given their first objective, to scour the island and secure a food supply. While Kiera and her companion head off for their own secret training, the trio is left to figure out how to work as a cohesive unit in the wild, much to Nagisa's noisy frustration. Deep within the island's dense foliage, Kaido questions the logic behind their current task, wondering how foraging for a meal translates to combat readiness. Beside him, Mai adjusts her attire, seemingly more focused on the immediate environment than his skepticism about the trial's methods. She counters his doubt with a stern warning, explaining that this is no ordinary tropical getaway. The island itself is a testing ground, and every action they take is part of a larger survival exercise designed to push them to their limits. Their conversation is interrupted by Nagisa's high-pitched excitement as she discovers what she believes to be a peculiar statue. She urges Kaido to take a photo of the find, completely unaware of the potential danger lurking in the shadows of the strange monument. Suddenly, the statue lurches to life, revealing itself as a monstrous, sentient plant creature. It lashes out with vine-like appendages, ensnaring the group in a sudden, violent ambush that leaves Nagisa screaming in terror as she is hoisted into the air. Reacting with practiced precision, Mai unleashes a devastating flame burst spell. The intense heat incinerates the creature's wooden limbs, forcing it to release its grip as the air fills with the scent of charred bark and magical residue. With the immediate threat neutralized, she calmly observes the smoldering remains, noting that the island is teeming with such magical flora and predatory beasts. On the ground, Nagisa groans in pain, a stark reminder that their training has truly begun and the environment is far more hostile than they anticipated. She stands with the others, listening as Mocha explains the bizarre nature of the island. Mocha reveals that most creatures here are strangely attracted to girls, a fact that leaves Kaido and Mai visibly shaken. Kaido questions the reality of such a place, but Mocha insists it's the truth, even if she's only been there a short time herself. Interrupting the conversation, the girl in the star-patterned bikini strikes a pose, demanding attention. She introduces herself as Kiera, though her behavior suggests she's Mocha's more assertive side. She claims leadership of the group, questioning why anyone else would try to steal the spotlight from her. She continues her boastful display, claiming her magical talent is second to none and that it's only natural for her to be the one calling the shots. Kaido, standing between her legs as she looms over him, can only offer a confused response, while Mai looks on with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. To emphasize her point, she leans in close to Mai, physically asserting her presence. She makes a competitive remark about her physical attributes, leaving Mai stunned and speechless by the sudden, aggressive proximity. After the intense encounter, Kaido tries to rationalize the situation, hoping that despite her abrasive personality, she has good intentions. Mai remains skeptical, but they decide to keep moving forward. Meanwhile, the self-proclaimed leader is already looking ahead, fueled by the desire to reclaim her dignity by acing the upcoming trial. As they navigate the dense forest, the terrain becomes treacherous. Mai suddenly loses her footing with a startled cry, but Kaido is quick to react, catching her before she can fall. He holds her steady, his concern immediate as he checks if she's alright. She looks up at him, a flush creeping onto her face from the unexpected physical contact. He quickly lets go, warning her that the road ahead is only going to get rougher and that they need to be extremely careful with every step. The moment leaves him feeling incredibly awkward. He can't help but notice how she seems to have been avoiding him ever since their accidental kiss, and the realization that sharing such a moment with someone you're not into must be miserable weighs heavily on his mind. Trying to break the tension, he suggests they focus on the task at hand and bring the food back before the sun sets. She agrees, though she keeps a noticeable distance, her expression unreadable as they continue their trek through the woods. She remains silent, her gaze fixed on the path ahead as they navigate the rocky ground. The sound of their footsteps and the rustle of the leaves are the only things filling the air as they push forward into the unknown. Mai is lost in thought, her face flushed as she dwells on the lingering tension between her and Kaido. She wonders if the memory of their accidental kiss is only haunting her, or if he feels the same weight of the moment. Her internal monologue is shattered by a piercing scream echoing through the woods. In the distance, Kiera stands in a state of disarray, her voice filled with panic as she demands to know what is happening. The source of the chaos is a trio of mischievous, horned monkeys. One of the creatures gleefully brandishes Kiera's stolen swimsuit top, ignoring her desperate pleas for its return as they taunt her from the forest floor. Seeing the commotion, Kaido and Mai sprint toward their companion. While Kaido is baffled by the sight of the primates, Mai urgently warns him that these are no ordinary animals, but magical beasts capable of wielding supernatural power. After a brief scuffle, Kaido winces, rubbing his head and noting the surprising strength of the small creatures. Mai elaborates on their nature, explaining that despite their size, they possess magical energy and a strength that far exceeds that of a human man, and a particular, troublesome interest in women. The monkeys continue their relentless assault on Kiera, swarming her with grabby hands. As Kiera shrieks in disgust, Mai watches with a shudder, remembering how she nearly fell victim to the same creatures 2 years prior. Suddenly, a vine-like appendage snags Mai's ankle, cutting her off mid-sentence. Kaido reacts instantly, realizing that the forest itself has turned hostile and they must act quickly to save her from whatever is pulling her into the brush. Before he can reach her, a gnarled, sentient tree hoists Mai into the air by her legs. She hangs upside down, crying out in terror as the wooden monster looms over her, its intentions unknown but clearly malevolent. He lunges forward, striking the trunk with all his might, but his fist rebounds off the bark as if it were solid stone. The magical flora lets out a shrill, mocking cry, completely unfazed by the physical blow. The situation spirals into total mayhem as Kiera struggles against the persistent monkeys while Mai remains trapped in the tree's grasp. Kaido stands amidst the turmoil, his mind racing to find a way to rescue both women from the forest's magical inhabitants. He realizes the situation is dire and shouts for Mayame to find Mocha, acknowledging his own inability to defeat the magical creatures alone. She, however, is more concerned with her exposed state, pleading with him to look away as she prepares to flee for help. He stands frozen in agonizing doubt, questioning his path while the horror unfolds behind him. Mai is gagged by invasive roots, and Kiera is swarmed by the grasping hands of the leering monkeys. If they fall, his trial ends in failure. Despite his fear, he begins to focus, desperately trying to tap into the charm ability he has yet to master. The monstrous tree and its simian allies roar in mockery, demanding he look them in the eye, but he refuses to back down, knowing he could never call himself a man if he abandoned them now. With a newfound fire in his eyes, he resolves to save them as an honorable wielder of magic. The weight of responsibility settles over him as he prepares to unleash his latent power. Kaido stands amidst a swarm of magical beasts, his mind racing as he realizes that while his teammates are in a bind, it is his turn to face these perverted creatures. He notes that his charm magic is active, a stroke of luck that has drawn their attention, and he resolves to be the one to save the others. The creatures, a mix of small simian beasts and the towering, gnarled magical flora, are completely entranced. They let out strange, rhythmic moans, their eyes glazed over as the magical allure takes hold of their primitive minds. Seeing the distraction holding, he sprints away, his striped trunks a blur as he celebrates the success of his gambit. However, the triumph is short-lived. As he glances back, he realizes with a jolt of panic that he didn't quite think through the consequences of being the sole object of their affection. He quickly regroups with Yui, Mocha, and Kiera, outlining a desperate plan. He explains that he will continue to draw the monster's focus, giving them the opening they need to strike with their own magic. Mocha hesitates, worried about the state of her attire, but the urgency of the situation leaves little room for modesty. The massive tree creature lunges before they can act, its vine-like appendages snaking through the air. He lets out a sharp cry of surprise as the rough bark coils around his torso, hoisting him off the ground with terrifying strength. The situation takes a bizarre turn as the creature and the smaller beasts begin to swarm him, their touch more inquisitive and overwhelming than purely violent. He shouts for help, pleading for someone to stop the onslaught as Mayame watches the chaotic scene in stunned silence. A sudden, violent surge of magical energy erupts across the clearing just as the pressure becomes unbearable. The impact is devastating, sending the smaller beasts tumbling through the air and forcing the wooden titan to release its grip. The dust settles to reveal the magical flora slumped and defeated, its strange vitality extinguished. He stands there, breathless and bound, while Mayame stares at the fallen foe, barely able to process the sudden shift in the battle. With the immediate threat neutralized, the remaining small creatures cling to him, their aggression replaced by a dazed docility. He offers a shaky word of thanks to the girls, acknowledging that their timely intervention was the only thing that saved him from a much stranger fate. He stands amidst the small, shaggy creatures, listening as the group explains their nature. These thrall apes have apparently accepted him as their master because of the magic he inadvertently cast, and they will now follow his every command. He remains bewildered by the sudden shift in the creature's behavior. He offers a small word of thanks to one of the monkeys, patting it gently. Nearby, Mocha watches with a growing sense of irritation, realizing that his accidental charm has turned the tide of the battle and earned him the loyalty of the beasts. She grits her teeth, unable to accept being sidelined while he receives all the praise. Determined to reclaim her dignity after her earlier humiliation, she prepares to make a grand comeback in this trial. Suddenly, a massive, hulking figure of stone and earth looms over the group, its presence casting a long shadow. It is the golem, the ancient guardian of the island, and its arrival sends a wave of shock through everyone. Kaido attempts to use his charm magic once more, but the creature remains unmoved. The titan slams its massive fist into the ground, shattering the earth and sending debris flying. He quickly realizes that his magic is useless against a being that isn't truly alive, but rather a construct of inanimate matter held together by pure arcane energy. As the dust settles, he rallies his new simian allies, declaring that they will take the monster down together. However, Mocha interrupts him, warning him not to overstep his bounds. She steps forward with renewed confidence, ordering the others to stay back and watch her work. Despite the concerns of her companions, she is determined to seize this moment and prove her worth. Her mind flashes back to the sting of past failures and the loss of her status after a previous defeat. For her, this battle is about more than survival. It is about reclaiming the only thing she has left to hold on to. He watches her with a sense of guilt, wondering if his own actions led to this dangerous situation. Meanwhile, she feels the weight of the moment, knowing that if she fails to deliver a spectacular performance, she may never recover her standing. With a defiant pose and a sharp glint in her eye, she prepares to unleash her full potential. She refuses to be overshadowed by Mai or anyone else, viewing this as her ultimate chance to show the world what Satomu Mocha is truly capable of. She unleashes a ferocious whirlwind of doom, followed immediately by a great flame serpent. But the massive stone guardian remains completely imperturbable, its rocky defense proving far too sturdy for her elemental magic. Seeing her struggle, the young man realizes that while this was meant to be practice, the upcoming trial will require them to function as a cohesive unit rather than a collection of individuals. He admits to himself that despite her eccentricities, her magical prowess is undeniable, yet clearly insufficient for this foe. His companion agrees, emphasizing that regardless of their differences, they are a team and must find a way to bring the behemoth down together. As she finishes speaking, the pigtail-clad mage grinds her teeth in frustration, realizing her most powerful spells are failing to even scratch the golem's rocky hide. Before she can regroup, the construct swings a massive, tree-like arm, forcing her to scramble back as the ground shatters where she stood moments before. Just as she is about to be crushed, the boy lunges into the fray with a roar, flanked by his simian allies, and unleashes a flame burst to draw the creature's ire away from his teammate. Watching him intervene, she remains defiant, shouting that she can handle the situation alone and that she must prove herself to reach the elusive Phoenix tier. Unmoved by her stubbornness, the dark-haired girl steps forward, her voice firm as she acknowledges the mage's ambition but warns that no one can reach such heights without help. She continues her lecture, using her own physical growth as a blunt metaphor for how everyone starts small and requires support to reach their full potential, reminding the mage that even the most impressive results take time and help to achieve. With her point finally hitting home, she watches as the group coordinates their efforts, with the others promising to act as support so the mage can focus entirely on dealing the heavy damage. She stands tall, her gaze fixed on the horizon as she admits a hidden truth, her desire to emulate Mina's Mai. The confession leaves the other girl stunned, barely able to process the unexpected admiration. Continuing her admission, she explains that despite Mai's age, she sees her as a superstar at the pinnacle of the magic world, a perfect celebrity in every sense. Her ultimate goal is clear. She wants to become a legendary Phoenix tier wielder, just like the woman she looks up to. This revelation leaves her companion speechless, prompting a sharp reminder to stop daydreaming and focus on the battle at hand. If they are going to win, they need to act now. Acknowledging her current limitations, she confesses that she isn't yet at that elite level, but until she reaches it, she will rely on their strength to see her through. With a determined look, she demands their support, a request that is met with a hesitant but firm agreement. Meanwhile, the battle rages on as the young warrior lunges at the massive construct, his voice strained with the effort of a powerful physical strike. Despite the intensity of his assault, he quickly realizes that even with his physical strength magically enhanced, the golem's stone hide is far too resilient to be breached by force alone. Seeing the opening, the pigtail-clad mage begins a rhythmic chant, calling upon the spirits of the wind to lend her their celestial power. A pillar of light erupts from the heavens, signaling the start of a devastating spell. As the massive guardian prepares a counterattack, the young man notices the shift in the air, realizing that their teammate has finally found her resolve. He calls out to the glasses-wearing warrior, alerting her to the changing tide. The ground trembles as the golem brings its massive fist down, a warning cry echoing across the battlefield as the impact sends debris flying in every direction. In the face of the crushing blow, the blonde warrior summons a shimmering wall of water, her aqua barrier absorbing the brunt of the force. Behind her, the others prepare to capitalize on the defense, focusing everything on the final incantation. She watches as the massive stone guardian begins to buckle under a relentless physical assault, cracks spiderweb across its rocky hide as a series of powerful blows find their mark, the sound of shattering stone echoing through the air. The creature roars in agony, its formidable defense finally showing signs of failure. He stands firm, his bare hands gripping the golem's massive leg with impossible strength, preventing the behemoth from retreating. With a confident smirk, he declares that a decade of training with the Tenjins has prepared him for this moment, asserting that even without a shred of magic, he possesses the power to dismantle the construct piece by piece. The beast can only stare down in shock as its mobility is completely neutralized by the young man's raw physical prowess. While he keeps the guardian pinned, the two girls seize the opening to prepare their final gambit. Yui summons a massive wall of water, her voice ringing out as she initiates the torrential deluge, while Mocha channels the atmosphere into a raging whirlwind vortex. They coordinate their efforts perfectly, merging the elements of wind and water into a singular, devastating force aimed directly at the heart of the weakened golem. They unleash their combined might in a spectacular display of elemental synergy, the torrential vortex of doom. The swirling mass of pressurized water and gale force winds engulfs the stone giant, the sheer pressure grinding its rocky form into dust. Their shared confidence and newfound bond manifest as a crushing tide of power, leaving the once unstoppable guardian with no hope of survival as the vortex tears it apart.